She asked a stranger to be her husband for one night. He said yes. What she didn't know was that this quiet, calm man was the most feared crime boss in the city, and he already knew exactly who she was. If this story pulls you in from the very first scene, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow along and don't go anywhere, because what happens between a desperate single mother and a billionaire mafia boss will change everything you think you know about love, power, and what it really means to be seen. The snow had been falling for 3 hours by the time Amara Brooks gave up pretending she wasn't crying. She stood in the narrow alley behind 11 Madison Square, a restaurant so expensive it didn't post prices on its website, tucked against the service entrance door with her coat pulled tight and her breath coming out in small white bursts. The kitchen noise leaked through the walls, the clang of sheet pans, someone barking about table 7, the low industrial hiss of the dishwashers. Inside, dinner service was still moving. Outside, Amara was falling apart in 4 inches of New York snow with a wedding invitation in her hand. She'd already read it 6 times. She knew she should stop reading it. She read it again anyway. Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Whitfield cordially invite you to celebrate the marriage of their son, Derek James Whitfield, to Miss Caroline Ann Pemberton. The date was 3 weeks away. The venue was a hotel in Midtown that charged $12,000 a night for its penthouse suite. The envelope had been hand-delivered to her apartment, which meant someone had gone out of their way to make sure she received it, which meant Derek had either sent it himself as a cruelty or his mother had, which was a different kind of cruelty. Either way, the result was the same. She was standing in an alley in the snow, crying, with 45 minutes left in her shift. Amara folded the invitation along its original crease and pushed it into her coat pocket. She pressed the back of her wrist against her eyes. She was not the kind of woman who cried in alleys. She was not the kind of woman who let things break her in half in the middle of a Tuesday. She had a 6-year-old son at home with a babysitter she was paying $16 an hour because the good ones cost money, and she had a stack of bills on her kitchen counter that she'd been rearranging like a card game for the past 3 weeks, and she had exactly $412 in her checking account. She did not have time to fall apart over Derek Whitfield. But the thing about grief, and Amara knew this the way you know things you wish you didn't, is that it doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about your schedule. It finds you in alleys and coat closets, in the 10-second gap between putting your son to bed and starting the dishes. It finds you everywhere. She heard the door open behind her and spun around, wiping her face with the back of her hand. It was Jun Seo. He was wearing a dark wool overcoat, unbuttoned, no hat despite the cold, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the small pot behind the hostess stand. The decent stuff, not the kitchen sludge they served the staff. He looked at her face, and he did not do the thing most people do, which was immediately say something to fill the silence. He just stopped at the door and held one of the cups out toward her. "You forgot yours," he said. That was a lie. She hadn't ordered coffee. She hadn't asked him for anything. But she took the cup because her hands were cold, and because she was tired, and because somewhere in the last 3 months of him coming in every Thursday night and sitting alone at table 12 and ordering the same thing, black coffee, the fish, whatever vegetable was in season, nothing for dessert, she had stopped pretending she didn't notice when he arrived. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. He didn't move to go back inside. He stood there in the cold with his own coffee and gave her the silence she needed, and Amara both hated and appreciated it in the same breath. Jun Seo was not the kind of man who was easy to read. He was Korean, somewhere in his mid-30s if she'd had to guess, with a quiet that wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. It was deliberate, like everything about him. His clothes were expensive but understated. He never took calls at the table. He always left a tip that was too large for a single diner eating alone, and when Amara had tried once to give back the excess, he'd looked at her steadily and said, "That's yours." And the way he said it made arguing feel pointless. She didn't know much else about him. He was just the regular at table 12. The quiet one. The kind one. She pulled the invitation out of her pocket before she could stop herself. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because the cold made her reckless. Maybe because she was tired of carrying it alone. "My ex-fiancé is getting married," she said, "to someone else. In 3 weeks." She looked down at the envelope. "He invited me." Jun Seo was quiet for a moment. That was deliberate. "Yeah." She laughed, but it came out wrong, too sharp, not enough air in it. Yeah, it was. Are you going? No. She said it fast and certain, and then, 2 seconds later, I don't know. She turned the envelope over in her hands. He left me when I was 7 months pregnant. Just left. Said he wasn't ready, took his name off the lease, forwarded his mail, gone in a week. My son has never met his father. She heard her own voice and made herself stop. She didn't talk about this. She didn't talk about this with anyone, least of all a customer she'd known for 3 months and didn't actually know at all. Sorry, that's too much. It's not, Junseo said. The snow fell between them for a moment. If I go, Amara said slowly, I go alone. And everyone who was there when he left me, his family, his friends, they all get to see that nothing changed, that I'm still just the girl he walked away from. She paused. If I don't go, he wins anyway. He sent this so I'd feel small either way. Junseo looked at the envelope, then at her. What if you didn't go alone? She glanced up at him. What? He didn't repeat it. He just waited, which was a thing he did, and it had a way of making you understand what he'd meant the first time. Amara stared at him. The cold was biting at her ears, and the coffee was warming her hands, and she was aware, suddenly, of how absurd this moment was. Standing in a service alley behind a restaurant in a snowstorm, about to ask a stranger to pretend to be her husband. That would be insane, she said. Probably, he agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. There was something in his expression that she couldn't name, not pity, not calculation, something steadier than both. Would you? She stopped, started again. This is genuinely crazy. I need you to know I understand that. She exhaled. Would you come with me? As my husband. Just for the event. Just so I can walk in there and not feel like, yes, Junseo said. She blinked. I haven't finished the sentence. You don't need to. He took a sip of his coffee. I'll be there. Amara stood in the snow and stared at him and tried to figure out what she'd just done. She couldn't. She didn't know this man. She didn't know his last name, didn't know what he did for a living, didn't know why he ate alone every Thursday at the same table and tipped like he was trying to change her life with a gratuity. She knew he was quiet and he was kind and he had just agreed, without hesitation, to help her survive the worst evening of her adult life. Okay, she said finally. Okay. He nodded once, like the matter was settled, and held the door open for her to go back inside. She went. She did not let herself think too hard about any of it. That was a skill Amara had developed over 6 years of raising Malik alone, the ability to take the next step before the full weight of the situation landed on her. It had gotten her through a lot of things. She hoped it would get her through this. The apartment was a one-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building in Crown Heights that had good bones and bad landlord. The radiator knocked every night between 2 and 4 in the morning. The hallway smelled like someone else's cooking. The elevator had been broken for 6 weeks, and the building manager's voicemail was full. But the walls of Malik's corner of the bedroom were covered in drawings he'd made himself, bright, crooked animals and buildings, and what he'd told her was a spaceship but looked more like a sneaker. And when Amara came home that night and found him asleep on top of his covers with a picture book still open on his chest, she stood in the doorway for a moment and did not think about Derek Whitfield at all. She moved the book. She pulled the blanket up. Malik made a small sound and shifted without waking, and Amara pressed her lips briefly to the top of his head and breathed him in. Soap and something sweet, the particular smell of her son asleep. Then she paid the babysitter, locked the door, and sat down at the kitchen table with the wedding invitation and her phone. Derek Whitfield's engagement had been in the society pages 3 months ago. She'd seen it by accident, the way you see things you've trained yourself not to look for. Derek Whitfield, son of prominent New York attorney Gerald Whitfield, to marry Caroline Pemberton, daughter of real estate developer Hugh Pemberton. There had been a photograph, Derek in a blazer, laughing, his arm around a woman who was blonde and polished and exactly the kind of woman his family had always wanted him to end up with. Amara had closed the browser and not opened it again. Not once. She was good at that. But the invitation was different. The invitation was physical. It had her address on it in calligraphy. It had been chosen and addressed and mailed, or more likely hand-delivered, by someone who wanted her to receive it and feel exactly what she was feeling right now. She folded it and put it in the drawer under the phone charger and the takeout menus. She thought about Junseo saying yes before she'd finished asking. She thought about that for a long time. Thursday came. He was at table 12 at 7:15, same as always. Black coat over the back of the chair, same as always. Coffee ordered before she reached the table, same as always. Amara set down his cup and he looked up at her, and she realized she was going to have to talk about it now that it was real and not a snow-induced act of temporary insanity. About the wedding, she started. Tell me the date, he said. The 14th. 3 weeks. He nodded. What time? 6 o'clock. It's at the Aldridge in Midtown. She hesitated. You don't have to. Amara. The way he said her name is even unhurried. I said I would go. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with that same steady, unreadable calm, and she had the unsettling thought that this man did not say things he didn't mean. Not because he was especially righteous, but because he simply didn't bother saying anything he wasn't committed to. There are things you should know about me, she said carefully. So you're not walking in blind. Tell me. She told him the broad strokes. Malik, 6 years old. Derek, the engagement that ended at 7 months pregnant. The way his family had looked at her. The way they'd always looked at her. Like she was a problem that had briefly attached itself to their son and would eventually be managed. She talked about it the way she talked about most hard things, quickly, without looking away. Like if she moved fast enough through the ugly parts, they'd lose their power. Junseo listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make the face people sometimes made. The wincing, sympathetic expression that was really about their own discomfort with someone else's pain. He just listened, and when she finished, he asked a single question. Does your son know about this wedding? No, Amara said. He doesn't know Derek exists. Something passed across Junseo's face. Brief, controlled, gone before she could name it. He nodded. All right, he said. We should meet before, so we know what we're walking into together. I can give you my number. He already had his phone out. She gave it to him. He texted her immediately. A single character, just an asterisk, so she'd have his number. She looked down at it for a second and then tucked her phone away and went to check on her other tables. She didn't look back at table 12. She was very careful about that. They met that Saturday at a coffee shop on Atlantic Avenue, neutral territory, 11 in the morning. Amara arrived 3 minutes early and ordered a coffee she didn't need, and found a corner table and then spent those 3 minutes talking herself out of leaving. She had not told anyone about this plan, not her friend Kezia, who would have had a response lasting somewhere between 45 minutes and a full day. Not her mother, who lived in Atlanta and had strong feelings about Amara's life choices. Not Malik, obviously. She had carried this alone for 3 days, and now here she was in a coffee shop, about to have a planning conversation with a man she barely knew about pretending to be his wife. Junseo arrived at exactly 11. He sat down across from her, ordered nothing, and looked at her like he was ready to work. Tell me who will be there, he said. Derek's family. His parents, both sets of grandparents, his 2 brothers, his friends from college, mostly. Caroline's family, she comes from money, real estate. Her father is Hugh Pemberton. She watched for recognition. Nothing on his face. About 200 guests, I think. It's a big wedding. And what is your relationship to him, officially? If someone asks. We dated for 3 years. We were engaged. He ended it. She kept her voice neutral. People know. It wasn't quiet. So walking in together makes a statement. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. What statement do you want to make? Amara looked at him. She'd thought about this. She'd thought about it every night this week while she lay in the dark and listened to the radiator knock. I want to walk in there as someone who moved on, she said. Not someone who's been destroyed by it. I want them to see me. She stopped. Started again. I want Derek to see me and feel stupid for leaving. Junseo held her gaze for a moment. Okay, he said. We can do that. You don't even know anything about me, she said. To convince people we're married, you'd need... You're from Atlanta originally. You moved to New York 6 years ago, right around when your son was born. You work Thursday through Sunday nights and take the rest of the week for Malik's school schedule. You take your coffee with 1 sugar and no milk. You have a habit of touching your left earlobe when you're thinking. You always check the whole section before you clock out, even when other servers have picked up your tables. He paused. Should I continue? Amara stared at him. You've been paying attention, she said. Her voice came out careful. I notice things, he said, like it was nothing. She thought about what it meant that this man had been quietly, thoroughly paying attention to her for 3 months, and she hadn't noticed, or hadn't let herself notice. She decided to think about that later. My ring size, she said. He looked at her left hand, which was resting on the table. He looked at it for about 2 seconds. 6.5, he said. She opened her mouth and closed it. How? I'll take care of the ring. He said it like it was an item on a checklist. What should I know about your son, in case anyone asks? Malik. 6 years old, first grade. He loves space, specifically the planets, specifically Saturn, for reasons he has explained to me many times. He can read above his grade level. He is currently obsessed with a cartoon about a frog detective. Amara heard herself talking about her son and felt some of the tension in her chest loosen. His last name is Brooks, same as mine. If anyone asks about his father, the answer is we don't discuss that. Junseo nodded. Then, quietly, does Malik know about this wedding? About where you're going that night? I'm going to tell him I'm going to a work dinner. She paused. He's perceptive. He'll know something's off. You could tell him the truth, part of it. She looked at him. He's 6. He's 6 and he has a frog detective cartoon. He's already familiar with the concept of investigating uncomfortable situations. Something shifted in Junseo's expression. Not quite a smile, but close to one. And it was the first time she'd seen anything like it. It changed his face entirely. Amara looked down at her coffee. I'll think about it. They talked for another hour. She learned almost nothing personal about him. He deflected questions with a naturalness that should have bothered her more than it did, redirecting back to logistics, to what they needed to know, to the practical work of the performance they were building. By the time they stood up to leave, she had a thorough plan for an evening. She was already dreading, and the strange, unsettling sense that she had agreed to something much larger than a single uncomfortable wedding. She walked home through the cold with her hands in her pockets, and her mind working and the memory of him saying her ring size like it was nothing, cycling over and over in the back of her head. Why? The night of the 14th arrived. Junseo picked her up at 5:30. He was driving himself, no driver, which she'd half expected, in a dark car that was expensive and quiet and smelled like leather and nothing else. He was in a black suit, the kind that cost more than her month's rent, fitted like it had been made specifically for him, which it probably had been. He looked at her once when she got in and said, "You look good," in the same even tone he used for everything. And Amara chose to receive it as a professional observation rather than think about it too hard. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, borrowed from Kezia, who had asked 0 questions in exchange for the right to ask every question later. Her hair was up. She had put on the gold earrings her grandmother had left her. The ring was on her finger. He'd sent it by courier the previous Tuesday. No note, just a small velvet box and a ring that fit exactly as he'd said it would. A band of dark gold with a deep blue stone at its center, simple and specific, and nothing like anything she would have expected from a man she'd thought she barely knew. She hadn't been able to stop looking at it. "Ready?" he said now, pulling out into traffic. "No," she said honestly. He almost smiled. That's the right answer. The Aldridge Hotel was lit up from half a block away, warmly golden through the falling snow, with a red carpet at the entrance and a small knot of photographers waiting outside. Amara saw the cameras as the car slowed and felt her stomach drop. "There are photographers," she said. "Yes. I didn't expect The Pemberton family is prominent," Junseo said. He was watching the entrance, his expression unreadable. It was always going to be photographed. Amara gripped the clutch in her lap. The car pulled up. The door was opened by a valet who clearly recognized the vehicle, who said Mr. Kang with a slight incline of his head. Junseo came around to her side and extended his hand, and Amara took it, and they walked into the Aldridge together with cameras clicking behind them in the cold. Inside was worse and better at the same time. Worse because it was crowded and bright, and immediately, within the first 30 seconds, She saw Derek's mother at the far end of the reception area in a cream-colored dress, laughing with someone Amara didn't recognize. Better because the noise and the crowd and Junseo's hand at the small of her back gave her somewhere to put her attention that wasn't the panic rising in her throat. "Slow down," Junseo said quietly near her ear. "You're walking like you're trying to escape." She made herself slow down. She matched his pace, unhurried, contained, the walk of someone who was exactly where they intended to be. "Breathe," he said. "I am breathing." "Breathe differently." She exhaled, longer, lower, some of the tightness in her chest released. "Better," he said. They took 2 glasses of champagne from a passing tray and moved into the room. Junseo was smooth at this. She could see it immediately, the way he navigated the space, the slight nods to people he seemed to recognize, the way he positioned himself so that she was never exposed to the room from any angle he couldn't cover. It was tactical in a way she couldn't fully explain and didn't have time to analyze. And then she saw Derek. He was across the room in a gray suit, already deeply involved in a conversation with several men Amara recognized from his work. He was laughing. That laugh she'd known for 3 years, the one that came out when he was performing for an audience. Beside him, already a few feet away, and talking to someone else, was Caroline Pemberton in an ivory dress, luminous and oblivious. Derek looked up. He found Amara's face in the crowd, the way you find someone you were once in love with. Immediately, like something in you already knows exactly where they are. And then his eyes moved to Junseo. Amara watched the calculation happen across Derek's face, the recognition that she was not alone, that the man beside her was not a placeholder, that whatever he had expected from tonight was not going to happen. She felt Junseo's hand rest on her lower back, barely there, just pressure, just the fact of it. And she stood up straighter. Derek excused himself from his conversation. He was coming over. "Brace yourself," she said under her breath. "I've been waiting," Junseo said. Derek reached them in 20 steps, his expression organized into something warm and controlled and entirely false. He kissed Amara on the cheek before she could prevent it, which she hadn't anticipated, and the familiar smell of him, the same cologne, same as it had always been, hit her like a physical blow somewhere in her sternum. "Amara," he said, "I was hoping you'd come." His eyes moved to Junseo with the deliberate smoothness of a man trying not to look threatened. "And you brought a guest." "My husband," Amara said. The word came out clean and level and surprised her with how easy it was. Something moved through Derek's expression. Not quite pain. Something more like shock, quickly suppressed. "I didn't know you'd—" He stopped. Reset. Extended his hand to Junseo. "Derek Whitfield." Junseo shook his hand. "Junseo Kang." He said his name the same way he said everything. Quiet, final, like the period at the end of a sentence. Derek's grip had gone slightly wrong. Amara could tell from the subtle stiffening in his jaw. Something about Junseo's hand in his, the weight of it, the steadiness, the complete absence of performance, had unsettled him. "What do you do, Junseo?" Derek said. "Investment," Junseo said simply. "What kind of investment?" "The kind that works out." He looked at Derek with an expression that was perfectly polite and absolutely impenetrable. "Congratulations on your wedding." Derek's smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. He said a few more things, something about being glad Amara was there, something about catching up later, and then excused himself. Amara watched him walk back across the room, and she felt, for the first time all evening, like she could actually breathe. "You did that on purpose," she said quietly. "Did what?" "The investment that works out. You said it to make him feel small." "I said it because it's true," Junseo said. She looked at him. He was watching Derek move through the room, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not hostility, but something measured, attentive, precise. Like he was assessing something. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her then. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We've been here 11 minutes. She almost laughed. She didn't, but she almost did. The evening moved. They ate, they navigated conversations, they performed the small choreography of a couple. The hand at the back, the quiet exchange, the way he filled her water glass without being asked. And once, when a woman Amara vaguely recognized as Derek's aunt said something about it being brave of Amara to come tonight, Junseo turned to the woman with an expression of such mild and absolute confusion and said, "Brave? Why would it be brave?" And the woman had fumbled and said something that dissolved into nothing. Amara kept her face composed. Underneath it, she was burning. And then, near the end of the cocktail hour, things shifted. A man had been watching Junseo for the last 20 minutes. Amara had noticed it without fully registering it. A heavy man in his 60s, expensive suit, the look of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. He was moving toward them now, with the directness of a person who didn't expect to be stopped. "Kang Junseo," the man said, and there was something in his voice, something that moved like recognition but landed like gravity. Junseo turned. Something in his posture changed, so slight that Amara almost missed it, a controlled settling, like a door closing quietly on the inside. "Mr. Harmon," Junseo said, "I thought that was you." The man, Harmon, was looking at Junseo with the expression of someone who had just found something valuable in an unexpected place. "What in the world are you doing at a Whitfield wedding?" "I'm a guest," Junseo said simply. "Of the Whitfields or—" Harmon's eyes moved to Amara with a sharp, assessing intelligence, and then back to Junseo. A slow smile built across his face. "Chairman Kang, don't tell me you've gotten married." The word chairman landed in the conversation like a stone in water, and Amara felt the ripples immediately. Two men nearby who'd been talking turned their heads. A woman across the room looked up. Something imperceptible shifted in the texture of the room, a reorientation, like compass needles all aligning at once. Amara looked at Junseo. He looked back at her for a single brief moment, and in that moment she read something in his face that she'd never seen there before. Not warning, not apology. Something more complicated than both. "I have," he said. "Recently." Harmon was delighted. He turned to Amara with his hand extended. "Then you must be Mrs. Kang, Richard Harmon. I've known this man for a decade, and he's never once let anyone get close enough to—" He laughed. "Extraordinary. Congratulations to both of you." Amara shook his hand. She smiled. She said thank you in a voice that came from somewhere outside her body. "Chairman Kang." The word was rolling around in her skull with nowhere to go. She felt Junseo's hand at the small of her back again, the same pressure as before, steady, deliberate. But it felt different now. It felt like the only solid thing in the room. Harmon spoke for 5 more minutes. He mentioned someone named Chairwoman Park, and a deal that had apparently closed in Seoul, and a property in Singapore, and twice more used the title chairman with the ease of someone who'd been using it for years. Junseo engaged with him in a kind of abbreviated, coded way that said very clearly that these were two men who conducted their conversations in shorthand developed over a long time. When Harmon finally moved on, Amara kept her expression precisely where it was. "Chairman," she said, "it's a title." "What kind of title?" "One I'll explain later." His voice was even, steady as always. "Junseo." She said his name quietly, with pressure. "What exactly do you do?" He was quiet for 3 seconds. Around them the party moved and shone. "Investment," he said. "You said that before." "It's still true." "But it's not—" "Amara." He said her name in the way he had that first night in the alley, even and unhurried, and she fell silent not because she was intimidated, but because something in the way he said it asked her to wait. "Not here. Not tonight. Let me—" A pause. "Let me get you through tonight first." She held his gaze. He held hers. And then a thing happened that Amara had not been prepared for, had not seen coming in any version of how this evening was supposed to go. Derek appeared at her elbow. Different now, altered, the performance stripped back and something rawer underneath. And he said, quietly, meant only for her, "I made a mistake. Amara, I think I made a mistake." The words moved through her like cold water. She did not turn to look at him. She looked instead at the middle distance, at a chandelier she was not seeing, and she felt the whole shape of the last 6 years compressing into the span between one breath and the next. The apartment with the broken lease, the hospital corridor alone, Malik coming into the world with no one on Derek's side of anything, the drawings on the bedroom wall, the The bills on the kitchen table, the ring on her finger that fit exactly right. Derek's hand was on her arm, light, uncertain, and Jun-seo, who never missed anything, had seen. He turned from the conversation he'd been half-sustaining with a passing acquaintance and looked at Derek's hand on Amara's arm. And for a single, unguarded second, something moved across his face that was nothing like the careful, neutral mask he wore everywhere else. It was brief, and it was real, and it was gone. But Amara saw it. Derek was still speaking. She heard the words, but not their meaning. She was looking at Jun-seo, and Jun-seo was looking at Derek's hand, and the entire evening had turned into something none of them had prepared for. "Let go of her arm," Jun-seo said. Quiet, measured, the kind of quiet that wasn't gentle. Derek looked up. Whatever he saw in Jun-seo's expression made him remove his hand. "Jun-seo," Amara started. "It's time to go," he said. Not a question, not a command exactly, but the kind of statement that left no room for an alternative. She looked at Derek, at the face she'd once known better than her own, the face that had told her he wasn't ready, the face above the signature on the lease cancellation, the face she'd carried around for 6 years. And she felt nothing that was clean or simple, nothing that could be wrapped up in a single emotion and put away. It was messy and complicated, and it always would be, because that was the truth about the things that had cost you. "I have to go," she said to Derek, and she walked out of the Aldridge with Jun-seo beside her, through the lobby and the cold air and the photographer still waiting at the entrance, and the cameras clicked, and neither of them spoke until they were inside the car and moving. "Tell me," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it. "Tell me who you are." The city slid past the windows, lights on wet pavement. Jun-seo kept his eyes on the road for a long moment, and then he said, "I own a company, several companies. The restaurant where you work is one of them." Amara felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "What?" "I've owned the Ellsworth Hospitality Group for 4 years. He paused. "Which includes 11 Madison Square." She stared at him. "You're my boss." "Technically, yes. You've been coming into a restaurant you own and sitting at table 12 and letting me—" Her voice broke off. She pressed her fingers against her mouth. "For 3 months." "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet. The light changed and the car moved through it. "Because it was the only place I could sit for 2 hours and feel like a normal person," he said. "Because you brought me coffee and talked to me like I was no one, and I didn't want to ruin that." Amara sat with this for a long time. The ring caught the light from a passing street lamp, and she looked down at it. The dark gold, the blue stone, the impossible fit. "Chairman?" she said again, but quieter now, different. "Yes." "Chair of what?" He looked at her for the first time since they'd gotten in the car. His expression was open in a way she hadn't seen it before, and it cost him something, she could tell. This openness, this exposure. It didn't come naturally to him. "The Kang Group," he said, "based in Seoul, offices in 7 cities, revenue that I won't quote you because it will sound like I'm trying to impress you. And I'm not." "Revenue from what exactly?" He held her gaze. "I think," he said carefully, "you already know the answer isn't simple." Amara looked at him in the passing dark of the car, at the man who had agreed before she'd finished asking, who had sent a ring that fit exactly right, who had said, "Not here, not tonight. Let me get you through tonight first." And she thought about the way the room had reoriented when that man Harmon had said chairman. Thought about the way Jun-seo had positioned himself all evening like a man who knew the geometry of every room he walked into. Thought about the way Derek had removed his hand from her arm without being asked twice. She thought about all of it. The car pulled up to her building. The broken elevator, the knocking radiator, the 4 floors of stairs. "Come in," she said. "I want to know who you are. All of it." Jun-seo looked at the building, then at her. Something moved in his expression. Careful, controlled, then, quietly, resolved. "I'll come up," he said. "But Amara," his voice was low, "you should know that some of what I tell you, you can't unknow it." The snow had started again. Light, steady, the kind that stuck. She looked at him in the cold light from the building entrance. "I've been unknowing things my whole life," she said. "Tell me the truth for once." She got out of the car. She heard his door open behind her. And as she pushed through the building door and started up the stairs with the man who was not who she'd thought, who was something much larger and more dangerous, and possibly also something she hadn't let herself name yet, Amara Brooks felt the particular terrifying electricity of a life about to change. She just didn't know yet into what. The stairs in Amara's building were narrow, and the light on the third-floor landing had been burned out for 2 weeks, and she'd reported it twice, and nothing had happened, so she navigated the last flight by memory and the glow coming up from the second floor. Jun-seo followed without comment. He didn't take out his phone for light. He just walked behind her in the dark like a man who was comfortable in it. That should have told her something. She unlocked the door, pushed it open, and the apartment was quiet and warm. The babysitter had left the kitchen light on, which she always did. Amara moved through the space with the automatic efficiency of someone who knew where everything was in the dark. She set her clutch on the counter. She reached back and unclipped one earring, then the other, and set them beside it. She didn't turn on more lights immediately. The kitchen lamp was enough. Jun-seo stood just inside the door. He'd closed it behind him. He was looking around the apartment with the same steady attention he gave everything, and Amara watched him take in the space, the small living area with Malik's backpack by the couch, the drawings pinned to the refrigerator, the stack of bills she'd pushed to the corner of the counter that she knew he could see. "Sit down," she said. He sat at the kitchen table. Amara filled a glass of water and set it in front of him, and then stood on the other side of the table with her arms crossed and looked at him. The burgundy dress suddenly felt wrong. Too formal for this room, too formal for what she was about to say. She stayed in it anyway. "The Kong group," she said. "Yes." "Tell me what that means. Not the version you give to Richard Harmon at cocktail parties. The actual version." Jun-seo looked at the glass of water. He turned it once, slowly, on the table. Then he looked up at her. "It started as a logistics company," he said. "My grandfather's. He built it in Seoul in the 60s, moving goods across the peninsula. My father expanded it. By the time I took over, it was larger, more complex." "How complex?" "Complex enough that some of what it does exists in spaces that aren't fully visible to regulators." Amara held his gaze. "You're telling me you run a criminal organization?" He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. "I'm telling you the Kang Group operates in areas that include activities most governments would prefer to oversee more closely. What I'm not telling you is that I'm a violent man or that the people around me are indiscriminate." He paused. "But I won't lie to you about what it is." The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, Malik made a small sleeping sound. The little snuffling shift he did sometimes when he was deep under, and Amara's whole body responded to it, that particular maternal radar that never fully switched off. "You own the restaurant where I work," she said. "Yes." "Does anyone there know that?" "The general manager knows, no one else." "Were you—" She stopped, started again. "Were you watching me before I ever spoke to you at that table?" Jun-seo was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I came in 6 months ago to evaluate the restaurant for a potential sale. I sat at table 12 because it was available and I liked the corner. You brought me coffee. We didn't speak beyond the order." He paused. "I came back the next Thursday." "Why?" He looked at her. "Because it was the only Thursday I hadn't spent either in a meeting or managing a problem. I sat there for 2 hours and nobody needed anything from me except a dinner order." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite discomfort, but an acknowledgement of something he rarely said out loud. "I've been doing this for 15 years, Amara. There aren't many places where I'm no one." She looked at him for a long time. The honest shape of what he'd said was sitting between them, and she didn't know what to do with it. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes." "The first time She exhaled, pressed her hand flat against the counter. "I asked you for a favor, a personal favor. I stood in an alley and told you about my ex-fiancé and asked you to come to his wedding. If you'd told me who you were, you wouldn't have asked me, obviously, which is why I didn't say it then." He met her eyes. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you made a decision for me." "Yes." He didn't qualify it, didn't dress it up. "I did." Amara uncrossed her arms. She turned to the window and looked out at the street. at the snow still coming down on the parked cars and the empty sidewalk. She was aware of the ring on her finger. She was aware of the way it had felt when she put it on, the weight of it, the rightness of the fit, which now felt like something else entirely. Tonight, she said, that man, Harmon, when he called you chairman, you didn't tell him we'd just started dating. You didn't correct him when he assumed the marriage was real. You let him think, I confirmed it, Junseo said. I told him we'd recently married. She turned back from the window. Why? Because Harmon talks, frequently and widely, and because the alternative, explaining that the woman beside me was pretending or that I was performing something for reasons he'd find either absurd or exploitable, was worse. Worse for who? For you, he said. If it came out that you attended your ex-fiance's wedding with a borrowed date, and that date turned out to be someone Harmon knows, that story gets interesting very fast, interesting in ways that would follow you. Amara stared at him. You were protecting me. I was being practical. You were protecting me and calling it practical. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She sat down across from him. The table was small and they were closer than she'd intended, and she didn't move back. What happens now, she said, with the Harmon thing, with what he thinks? Nothing has to happen. Harmon operates mostly in Seoul and Singapore. The likelihood of your paths crossing, that's not what I mean. She looked at him directly. I mean with us, with whatever this was tonight. We had a deal. I held up my end. You held up yours. She paused. So what happens now? Junseo looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not calculation, something more uncomfortable than that. I have a situation, he said. She waited. My mother has been applying pressure for the past 3 years. She wants me married, not because she has any particular interest in my happiness, but because she believes a visible family life provides useful insulation for the family's operations. A married chairman is harder to destabilize than an unmarried one. It's a perception argument, and it's not wrong. Amara looked at him. What kind of pressure? She has introduced me formally to 11 women from families she considers appropriate. She has twice threatened to dissolve the succession structure in ways that would force my hand on the matter. Last month, she arranged for a story to be placed in a Korean business publication, implying I was engaged to the daughter of a parliamentarian I've never met. His voice was flat, controlled, but there was something under it, a tiredness that wasn't about this conversation, that had been accumulating for a long time. She won't stop. That's not who she is. So tell her no. Something crossed his face. It's not that simple. It never is with mothers. Amar said it without meaning to, and something in the way she said it made his expression change for just a second, something that might have been recognition. There is a family gathering, he said, in 3 weeks, at the estate in Connecticut. My mother hosts it annually. Family, business partners, people whose opinion matters to the operational structure of the Kang Group. She has already told me she plans to use this gathering to formalize an arrangement with the Park family. He paused. I need to attend that gathering already married. The room was very quiet. You want me to come with you, Amara said. I want to offer you a proposition, he said. Formal, clear terms. He looked at her steadily. 1 weekend. You attend the gathering at the estate as my wife. You meet my mother, my family. We maintain the performance through Sunday evening. In return, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set a folded document on the table between them. Open it. She looked at it. She didn't touch it. What is it? Read it and you'll know. She opened the document. It was 2 pages. She read it slowly, which was her habit. She'd trained herself never to skim anything that mattered. When she finished, she set it down flat on the table and put her hands over it like she needed to hold it in place. The number in the document was enough to cover every debt she had. The medical bills from when Malik had bronchitis and she'd had to take him to the ER twice in 1 winter. The credit card she'd been running minimum payments on since the year she had to take unpaid leave. The student loans. Everything. And then a remainder, not a small one, designated specifically for what the document called future educational expenses for one minor child, Monsieur Brooks. That's Malik's college fund, she said. Her voice was strange. It's a beginning of one, Junseo said. She looked up at him. You had this drawn up already. I had it prepared after the alley, after I said yes. He held her gaze. I told you I noticed things. Amara pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. When she lowered her hands, she looked at the document again. The number. The line about Emser Brooks. I have a son, she said. He's 6 years old. His mother does not take him to houses full of criminals for weekend visits. There won't be. He would have to come with me. She said it over him, flat. I don't leave him for a weekend. Not with a babysitter, not with anyone. If this is happening, Malik comes. Junseo was quiet for a moment. That changes the nature of the performance. I know what it changes. Those are my terms. He looked at her for a long count of seconds. She looked back and she did not soften the look because she meant every word of it, and he needed to know that. All right, he said. All right, she repeated. He's not a prop. He's not a detail in a story you're telling your mother. He is my son, and at the first sign that any of it is bad for him, I take him, and we leave, and you keep the money anyway because that's my condition. Understood. Say it back to me. He met her eyes. Your son is not part of the performance. His welfare is the priority. If anything feels wrong for him, you leave immediately. The agreement stands regardless. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she looked down at the document. I need to sleep on it, she said. Of course. And I need you to understand that I am not. This isn't. She stopped and started again. I know what you are now. I know what the Kong group is. I'm not pretending I don't. I'm not asking you to. And it doesn't change. She stopped again. The sentence was going somewhere she hadn't planned. I'll call you tomorrow, she said instead. Junseo stood. He picked up the document and held it out to her. She took it. He buttoned his coat. The wedding tonight, he said, near the door. You did well. We both know I almost fell apart 3 times. You didn't, though. He looked at her. That counts? She crossed her arms again. The ring, she said. I'll give it back. Keep it. It was made for your hand. He said it the same way he'd said everything else. Simple, direct, already settled. And then he opened the door and he was gone, and the apartment held the shape of him for a few seconds longer, and then it let that go too. Amara stood at the kitchen table alone. She looked at the document, at the number, at M. Brooks. She looked at the ring. Then she went down the hall and stood in the doorway of the bedroom where Malik was still sleeping. The blanket she'd tucked up now kicked sideways, one arm thrown over his face the way he slept when he was dreaming hard. She thought about what Junseo had said. He's 6, and he's familiar with the concept of investigating uncomfortable situations. She thought about one weekend, about the number in the document, about Malik's college, which she'd been storing in the category of things she would figure out somehow, the way she stored most things she didn't know how to fix yet. She thought about the way Junseo had said, your son is not part of the performance, and looked at her like he was prepared to repeat it as many times as it took. She thought about Derek's hand on her arm and Junseo's expression when he saw it. She was a practical woman. She had been practical her entire adult life because the alternative was drowning. This was a transaction. Uncomfortable, complicated, borderline insane, but a transaction. One weekend for Malik's future. She could survive a weekend. She almost believed it. She called Junseo the next morning at 9:45, after she'd walked Malik to school and come back and stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes drinking coffee and looking at the document again. He picked up on the second ring. Yes, she said. A pause. Good. I have conditions beyond the ones we discussed last night. Tell me. Malik knows the minimum necessary. He's told we're visiting a friend's family. He's not told anything about what you do, who your family is, any of it. He's 6, not 16. Agreed. I need to meet you somewhere with him before the weekend, somewhere neutral. If he's uncomfortable with you, this doesn't happen. Silence. Then, also agreed? And I want to know what we're walking into. Your mother. What she's like. What she'll do when she sees me. This pause was longer. She'll be difficult, he said finally. How difficult? She is a woman who has run a criminal dynasty for 30 years and considers emotional control both a virtue and a weapon. She will assess you thoroughly, and she will let you know exactly where she finds you lacking. He paused. She will have particular feelings about the fact that you're black. Amara had expected that. She'd expected it, and it still landed with the particular dull weight of something you've been carrying so long you'd forgotten it was heavy. And you're asking me to spend a weekend with this woman, she said. I'm asking you to spend a weekend appearing to be married to her son, he said. The distinction matters. You'll back me up. In front of her. Yes. Every time. Not just when it's bad enough that you can't ignore it. Every time. Yes. His voice was quiet, certain. Amara exhaled. One more thing. What? Whatever is happening between us. She stopped. She hadn't meant to say between us. She amended it. Whatever dynamic has developed in how we interact, it doesn't interfere with the arrangement. We're professional. We're clear on what this is. The pause on the other end was a beat too long. Agreed, he said. She heard the slight friction in the word. Not reluctance, something more contained than that. She filed it away. I'll text you tomorrow to arrange the meeting with Malik, she said. I'll be available whenever works for him. Don't say things like that. Like what? Like whenever works for him. Like you're already... She stopped. Like you already know him. You don't. He was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. She hadn't expected an apology. It disarmed her more than almost anything else he could have said. She covered it. Tomorrow, she said, and hung up. The meeting happened 4 days later, a Thursday, at a park in Prospect Park with a wide flat path Malik liked because you could see all the way to the pond, and on cold days the water had a particular color he'd decided was his favorite, which he described as almost purple, but not purple, more like the feeling of purple. She told Malik they were meeting a friend of hers for a walk. Malik had asked what kind of friend. She'd said a quiet kind. Malik had processed this and said, "Does he have a dog?" She'd said she didn't know. Malik had said, "Then it's fine." Junseo was there before them. Amara saw him from 20 yards away. Dark coat, hands in his pockets, standing at the path entrance, looking out at the pond with an expression she was starting to recognize as his neutral state, which wasn't blank exactly, but was very still. Malik saw him too. He looked up at Amara. She looked down at him. "That's him?" Malik said. "That's him." Malik looked back at Junseo with the thorough, unsentimental assessment of a 6-year-old who understood that grown-up interactions required evaluation. "He's tall," he said. "He is. Does he know about Saturn?" "You can tell him." They walked up. Junseo turned when he heard them. His eyes went to Malik first, briefly, carefully, and then to Amara, and something in his expression shifted, adjusted, like he was recalibrating for something he hadn't fully prepared for. Malik looked up at Junseo. "Are you my mom's friend?" he said. "I'm trying to be," Junseo said. Malik considered this for a second. "What's your name?" "Junseo." Malik's mouth moved through the syllables. "Jun. Seo." He tried it again. "Is that Korean?" "It is." "My friend Daniel is Korean. He has the best snacks." Malik looked at Junseo's coat pockets. "Did you bring snacks?" "Malik," Amara said. "I did not," Junseo said seriously. "That was a mistake on my part. I'll know for next time." Malik accepted this and started walking, which was his way of indicating that a person had passed initial assessment and could now walk with him. Amara looked at Junseo. He looked back at her with an expression she couldn't fully decode, something quiet and careful, a little raw around the edges. They walked. Malik talked, because Malik always talked on this path, about the pond, about a bird he'd seen the previous week that he was now convinced was a rare species, about Saturn's rings, and specifically the fact that they were made of ice and rock and were only about 30 feet thick in some places despite being hundreds of thousands of miles wide. He delivered this information to Junseo without checking whether Junseo wanted it, because that was also Malik. Junseo listened to all of it. He didn't perform listening. He didn't do the exaggerated nodding and questioning that adults often did with children, the performance of engagement. He just walked and listened, and when Malik said something particularly specific about planetary rings, Junseo asked a follow-up question that was a real question, not a test. How do they know the rings are only 30 feet thick? Malik stopped walking. He looked at Junseo with an expression of pure delight. They used radio signals, he said, from the Voyager probe. You can measure density by how radio waves move through things. That's precise work for something that far away, Junseo said. I know, Malik said, like he'd been waiting his entire life for someone to acknowledge this. And then he went back to walking, and Amara walked between them, and she was aware with a sharpness that almost hurt of what this looked like from the outside and what it felt like from the inside, and the distance between those two things. She needed to keep that distance clear. On the Saturday morning of the weekend, Amara packed for herself and Malik with the systematic calm of a woman walking into something she had no framework for and had decided to treat as a logistics problem rather than a personal one. She made 2 bags. She packed Malik's Saturn book and his frog detective thing and the small comfort object he still slept with, a worn stuffed bear he'd named Dispatch after the frog detective's sidekick. She told Malik they were going to visit someone's big house in the country. How big? Malik said. Bigger than our building. How much bigger? A lot. Malik absorbed this. Will there be horses? I don't know. Can I ask if there are horses? You can ask anything you want. Cool. He went back to his book. Junseo arrived at 7:30 in a different car from the wedding night. Larger, black, with a driver this time. He got out when they came down the steps. He was in dark clothes, no tie, and he looked first at Malik and then at Amara, and she read something in his expression she didn't have language for yet. Morning, he said to both of them. Morning, Amara said. Good morning, Malik said formally, and then, Are there horses? There are 2, Junseo said. Their names are Hyuk and Boram. Malik stared at him. Can I see them? Yes. Malik looked at Amara. This is a good house, he said, and got in the car. Amara stood on the sidewalk for a second. Junseo was holding the door. She looked at him. His excitement about the horses doesn't mean anything, she said quietly. About us. About this. I know, Junseo said, just making sure. Amara. He said her name the way he always said her name. I know. She got in the car. The drive to Connecticut was 2 hours. Malik fell asleep 40 minutes in, his cheek against the window, Dispatch wedged between him and the seat. The car was quiet. Amara watched the city give way to highway, give way to bare winter trees and gray-white fields. Your mother, she said, low enough not to wake Malik. Does she know I have a son? She knows. And she didn't say anything about it. He paused. That's not the same as acceptance. It's strategy. She's waiting to see. To see what? Whether you matter enough to confront directly. He looked at the road. If she thinks you're temporary, she'll be polite and work to remove you from the situation through other means. If she thinks you're serious, she'll confront you directly. Which is worse. The polite version, he said, every time. Amara thought about that. What's her name? Kang Soo Yeon. You address her as Chairwoman Kang or Yeomyeonim. That's what's expected by a daughter-in-law. She'll notice if you don't, and she'll decide what it means. What does it mean? In this case, nothing. You didn't grow up knowing this, but she'll interpret it as a statement if you don't use it. So I call her Yeomyeonim. If you're comfortable with it, Amara said the word quietly, getting the sound of it. What does it mean? Mother, Junseo said. The word sat in the car between them. I'll use it, Amara said. He nodded. They drove in silence for a while. The trees thickened, the fields widened. The sky was low and pale, and the kind of cold that made everything look permanent. Junseo, she said. Yes. After this weekend. She kept her voice even. After this is over and you've handled your mother, what happens? He was quiet for a moment. The agreement concludes. And the restaurant. If you want to continue working there, nothing changes. If you'd rather not, I'll arrange a transfer. I don't want a transfer. She said it quietly. I want to keep my job, and I want it to be my job that I earned and that has nothing to do with this. She looked at him. Can you give me that? Yes, he said. Swear it. He glanced at her. Something moved through his expression. I swear it. She nodded. She turned back to the window. 15 minutes later, the car turned off the main road onto a long private drive lined with bare trees, and at the end of it, the Kang estate came into view. Stone and glass, large in the specific way of places that had been built to communicate permanence, lit warmly from within against the gray morning. Malik woke up. He pressed his face to the window. "Whoa," he said. Amara put her hand on his knee. She felt in that moment the full weight of what she had agreed to. Not the money, not the arrangement, but this. Her son's face against a car window saying "whoa" at a house she had no business being inside, with a man she had no business caring about to walk into a room full of people for whom she was a problem to be managed. She was still thinking about this when the car stopped and the front door of the estate opened and a woman appeared at the top of the steps. She was in her 60s, compact and precise, in dark clothing that was expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. Her face was controlled in a manner that looked like calm, but was something else. She looked at the car. She looked at Jun Seo when he got out. And then she looked at Amara. The look lasted 3 seconds. It catalogued, assessed, and concluded. Amara stood in the cold driveway with Malik's hand in hers and looked back. Jun Seo was at her side. "Ready," he said quietly. Not quite a question. Amara lifted her chin. Inside the house, she would later learn, there were 17 guests already arrived. Family members, business partners, 2 men whose names Jun Seo had warned her not to repeat in conversation, and a woman named Park Ji-yeon, who was 28 years old, the daughter of a parliamentary family, and who had been told by Chairwoman Kang that this weekend would clarify her future. Park Ji-yeon was inside, already at home in the estate, already seated at the breakfast table when they were shown to the dining room. She looked at Amara with the expression of someone who had been expecting her, or someone like her, and had prepared accordingly. And Amara looked back, and understood, with complete and sudden clarity, that the real performance had not been the wedding. It was. The dining room of the Kang estate was designed to make you feel the size of yourself. High ceilings, dark wood, a table that could seat 24 without crowding. The morning light came in through tall windows on the east side and fell across the white tablecloth in long, cold strips. Silver was set precisely. Flowers arranged without warmth. Everything in the room communicated that people who sat here understood their place in a specific order, and that order had been established long before you arrived. Amara understood all of this in the 4 seconds it took her to walk through the doorway. 17 people. Most of them already seated, conversations pausing in the particular way conversations pause when someone enters a room and everyone has already been briefed on who that someone is. The pauses were brief, polished, controlled, but she caught them. She'd spent 6 years as a server in expensive rooms. She knew exactly how people looked at you when they'd already decided what you were. Park Ji-yeon was at the far end of the table, to the left of the empty seat that was clearly designated for Chairwoman Kang. She was in a cream-colored blouse, dark hair pulled back, with the particular composed stillness of a woman who had been trained from childhood to sit in rooms like this and take up exactly the right amount of space. She looked at Amara for a moment, unhurried, deliberate, and then looked away. It was the looking away that was precise. The message wasn't in the look, it was in the dismissal. Malik was holding Amara's hand and looking at the table with wide, impressed eyes. "There's so much silverware," he whispered. "Don't touch anything yet," Amara whispered back. "I know," he said, slightly offended. Jun Seo moved them to their seats, midpoint of the table, positioned across from 2 men Amara recognized from his descriptions as family, older cousins by the look of them, both watching Jun Seo with expressions that were carefully neutral in the way that family expressions often were when something significant was being silently contested. A woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Jun Seo's aunt touched Amara's hand when she sat down and said something in Korean that Jun Seo translated as "welcome to the family home," with a flatness that suggested the translation was approximate. Chairwoman Kang sat last. She came in without announcement and everyone shifted slightly when she entered. Not dramatically, just that small unconscious reorientation of bodies toward a center of gravity. She sat. She looked at Jun Seo. She looked at Amara. She looked at Malik. "Your son," she said to Amara, in English, precisely accented, each word measured. "What is his name?" "Malik," Amara said. "Malik." The chairwoman repeated it without inflection. "How old?" 6. A pause. He will eat with the family? He goes where I go, Amara said. Something shifted at the corners of Chairwoman Kang's mouth. Not a smile, not hostility, a recording of information. She looked at Malik directly then, and Malik, who had no social self-consciousness whatsoever, looked directly back. Good morning, Malik said. The chairwoman looked at him for a moment. Good morning, she said, and then she picked up her coffee and the meal began. The morning was a performance in layers. On the surface, breakfast, conversation, the ordinary social machinery of a family gathering. Beneath that, assessment, positioning, the quiet combat of people who understood that every exchange was also an argument. Amara ate and spoke when spoken to, and kept Malik from reorganizing the silverware and watched everything. Ji-yeon did not speak to her directly. She spoke around her, to Jun-seo, to the aunt, to a man across the table who seemed to be a business partner, in a way that made Amara's presence a consistent peripheral fact, something acknowledged by its exclusion. Her Korean was fluent, and her English, when she used it, was precise. She laughed twice at things the older cousin said. Both times she glanced at Jun-seo. Jun-seo did not look at Ji-yeon. He was attentive to Amara in the particular way they'd practiced, refilling her water, translating what needed translating, once placing his hand briefly over hers on the table when one of the older men said something in Korean that made the room tighten. She didn't know what had been said. Jun-seo's hand over hers was an answer and a redirection simultaneously. After breakfast, the group dispersed. Jun-seo was pulled into a conversation with two of the businessmen that had the quality of something that couldn't be deferred. He looked at Amara before he went and said quietly, "The sitting room on the left is empty. Take Malik there if you need space." She nodded. She did not go to the sitting room. She took Malik outside to find the horses, because she needed cold air and open ground, and because she had promised. The horses were in a stable behind the east wing, two dark animals, large and calm, their breath visible in the cold. Malik stood at the fence and stared with his whole face. A groundskeeper appeared and asked if the boy wanted to come closer, and Amara stood in the thin winter light and watched her son reach out his small hand and let one of the horses push its nose into his palm, and she felt something shift painfully in her chest that she could not afford to feel right now. She felt it anyway. That was the problem with love. It never waited for a convenient moment. Ji-yeon found her there. It wasn't accidental. Nothing about this woman was accidental. She came around the corner of the stable in a dark coat, alone, moving with a deliberateness that made clear she had identified where Amara was and come there specifically. She stopped at the fence a few feet away and looked at the horses and said nothing for a moment. Amara kept her eyes on Malik. "Your son is fearless," Ji-yeon said. Her English was perfect, not accented, shaped. "He doesn't know enough yet to be scared of the right things," Amara said. Ji-yeon almost smiled. "That's not a criticism." "I didn't ask." A pause. The horse shifted. Malik made a sound of delight and said something to the groundskeeper about the color of the horse's eyes. "I want to be direct with you," Ji-yeon said. "Go ahead." "I've known the Kong family for 9 years. I've known Jun-seo for 7. Our families have had an understanding for the last 2. She said it without heat, without performance, like she was presenting facts. "I was invited to this gathering with a specific expectation." "I know," Amara said. "Then you understand what your presence here communicates." "I do." Ji-yeon was quiet for a moment. She turned to look at Amara directly for the first time, not the peripheral assessment from the breakfast table, but a real look, the kind that was trying to understand something. "He married you very quickly," she said, "considering no one knew you existed 3 weeks ago." Amara held the look. "People do that sometimes, not Jun-seo." Something moved through Ji-yeon's expression, not exactly pain, but the controlled residue of it. "He is not an impulsive man." "No," Amara agreed. "He's not." Ji-yeon looked back at the horses. "I'm not his enemy," she said quietly. "I want you to understand that. I'm not. This isn't about rivalry. I was told certain things were true. I arranged my expectations accordingly. I simply want to understand what is actually real." She paused. "Because I've watched him with you this morning, and I can't fully tell. The honesty in it was disarming. Amara had prepared for cruelty, for the polished dismissal variety Junseo had warned her about. She hadn't prepared for this. A woman standing in the cold being genuinely, carefully honest about her own confusion. I think, Amara said, measuring each word, that's something you should discuss with Junseo. Jiyeon nodded slowly. Yes, she said. I think I should. She looked at Malik one more time. Then she turned and walked back toward the house. Amara stood at the fence until she disappeared around the corner. Then she exhaled, a long, jagged release of breath that fogged in the cold air. Malik looked up at her. Are you okay, Mom? Yes, baby. You have your thinking face. I know. Is it about the quiet man? She looked down at him. Which quiet man? Malik gave her the look that meant he found her question puzzling. Junseo, he said. He looks at you like dispatch looks at clues, really hard. Amara stared at her son for a moment. Let's go inside, she said. The afternoon broke apart. The men gathered in a study for what Junseo had described as a quarterly discussion that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the operational structure she'd agreed not to ask questions about. Amara was left with the women, the aunt, 2 younger cousins, and the chairwoman who appeared in the afternoon sitting room with tea and a composed expression that meant she had arranged this deliberately. Malik was given a tour of the estate's library by a young assistant who seemed genuinely pleased to show him things. Amara watched him go down the hall and then sat down in the sitting room and looked at Chairwoman Kang across a low table and understood that this was the real conversation. Everything else had been preamble. The cousins made small talk for 10 minutes. The chairwoman let them. And then she said something in Korean, and both cousins stood, made polite excuses, and left. Just the 2 of them. Chairwoman Kang poured tea with the precision of someone performing a ritual that meant something. She set the cup in front of Amara. She sat back. You are not what I expected, she said. Amara picked up the cup. What did you expect? Someone more, a pause, deliberate, manageable. I'm not unmanageable, Amara said. I'm just not managed. The chairwoman looked at her steadily. In the light of the sitting room, she was more visible. The lines around her eyes, the deliberate architecture of her composure, the tiredness underneath it that she'd been carrying for so long it had become structural. She was a woman who had run something enormous and dangerous for decades. She had done it, Amara understood, without anyone asking whether she wanted to. My son has not been predictable this year, the chairwoman said. He has avoided the arrangements I've made. He has become distant in ways that concern me. I had attributed this to the pressures of the expansion in Singapore. She paused. I had not attributed it to a woman in Brooklyn. Crown Heights, Amara said. The chairwoman's expression didn't change, but something in it acknowledged the correction. You work in a restaurant. I do. You are a single mother. I am. The child's father is not part of our lives, Amara said. Flat, final, not a door. That's a closed subject. The chairwoman looked at her for a long moment. You are not intimidated by me, she said. It wasn't entirely a compliment. I've been stared down by hungrier people than you, Amara said. With respect, a silence. And then something happened that Amara had not anticipated. The chairwoman's expression shifted, fractionally, into something that wasn't warmth but was its distant relative. A recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement of one woman who'd learned to hold ground looking at another. I don't approve, the chairwoman said. I want to be clear about that. I don't approve of this marriage, of the speed of it, of the circumstances. I don't approve of the visibility of your situation in relation to the family's operational needs, and I don't... She stopped. I have concerns about a child in this environment. The last sentence landed differently. Amara set her teacup down. As do I, she said, every day. The chairwoman looked at her. I am fully aware, Amara said, of what your son's life is, what this family is. You think I walked into this blind. I didn't. Her voice was even, but there was heat running under it. And I will tell you the same thing I told him. My son's safety is the condition on which everything else depends. If that's a problem for you, then we have a different conversation. The chairwoman was quiet for a very long moment. You love him, she said. The words hit Amara without warning. She kept her face still. He's my son, she said. That's not something that requires discussion. I don't mean your son. The chairwoman's eyes were steady, reading her. I mean mine. The sitting room was very quiet. This is a business arrangement, Amara started. No, the chairwoman said softly. It isn't. I've been watching business arrangements my entire adult life. I know exactly what they look like, and I know what they don't look like. She looked at Amara with an expression that had exhausted all its armor. I also know my son, and the way he looks at you is not a performance. Amara did not respond. She could not respond. Something was happening in her chest that she had been refusing to name for 2 weeks, and she was not going to name it in this room in front of this woman. I still don't approve, the chairwoman said. I know, Amara said, but I am... A pause, long and complicated. I am paying attention. But the evening dinner was formal. 22 people at the long table, candles, crystal, the full weight of the estate's presentation turned on. Amara had changed into the dress she'd packed for this. Dark green, simple, correct, without being extravagant. She'd braided her hair back. She'd put on the ring. Junseo was already at the table when she came down. He looked at her when she entered, and something moved across his face that he didn't fully suppress. She sat beside him. Malik, freshly cleaned and significantly less patient, was on her other side, already negotiating with the breadbasket. How was this afternoon? Junseo said quietly, near her ear. Interesting, she said. My mother, we had tea. It was a conversation. She looked at him. She's not what I thought. No, he said. She never is. The dinner moved. Courses came. Conversation flowed around the table in currents she could follow, and currents she couldn't. Ji-yeon was present, composed, and said nothing directly to either of them. The two older cousins watched Junseo with the same contained assessment from breakfast. It was during the third course that one of the cousins, the one on the right, the one who'd said something at breakfast that made Junseo's hand close over hers, leaned forward and addressed the table in Korean. Junseo's posture changed beside her, very slightly, the kind of change you only caught if you'd been paying careful attention to a person for long enough. She had been. What's he saying? She said quietly. Junseo's jaw was set. He said nothing for a moment. Around the table, people were looking at their plates, or at the cousin, or at Junseo, with expressions that were very carefully elsewhere. Junseo, she said. He's asking, Junseo said, low and controlled, whether the American woman knows that her marriage license was filed in a jurisdiction that has a 90-day contestation window, and whether she has considered what happens to a contract marriage if the family initiates a review of its validity. The words took a moment to reach her. Contract marriage. She looked at Junseo. He was looking at the cousin with an expression that was entirely still and entirely dangerous. They know, she said. It wasn't a question. His silence was the answer. Someone told them. Her voice was low. She was processing it fast, the way she processed everything that hurt. Quickly, dispassionately, so the full weight of it didn't flatten her before she could figure out what to do. Who? The cousin was still speaking. The chairwoman was at the head of the table with her face completely controlled and her eyes on her son. Junseo. She said his name and he looked at her, and she saw it in his face. The answer, already there. The thing he knew and hadn't yet said. Who told them? I don't. She held his gaze. Don't tell me you don't know. You know everything in this room. You always know. Who told them we're not actually married? He exhaled. One long, contained breath. And then, the invitation records from the Aldridge went through a hotel management company. The same company runs 3 properties I have an interest in. Someone pulled the guest records. Someone saw that the reservation was made under your name alone, before I was added. He paused. They had a researcher verify it. When there was no marriage record in New York or New Jersey, There's no marriage record, she said, because we aren't married. No. The table had gone quiet in a way that meant the conversation, though in English, was being fully followed. Amara looked at the cousin. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who believed he had just won something. She looked at Ji Yeon, who was looking at her plate with an expression that was not triumphant and not satisfied, and might, if she'd had time to examine it, have been something closer to complicated grief. She looked at Malik, who was eating bread and watching a candle flicker with the total absorption of a child, who understood that something was wrong in the adult air around him, but hadn't yet identified what. She looked at Chairwoman Kang. The chairwoman was looking at her, not with victory, not with told you so, with something that was almost regret. Amara put her napkin on the table. "Excuse me," she said to no one in particular. She stood. She touched Malik's shoulder. "Come with me, baby." "But I'm not done with the bread." "Bring it." Her voice was quiet and absolute. She walked out of the dining room with Malik's hand in hers and the bread roll still in his fist, and the sound of 20 people's silence behind her. And she went up the stairs to the room they'd been given, and she sat down on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and breathed. Just breathed. That was all. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she'd learned to do it when things got so bad that breathing was the only task she could manage. Malik climbed up beside her. He didn't say anything. He just leaned his small, solid weight against her arm and sat there, and she felt him there, and it helped. She didn't know how long she sat like that. Long enough for the dinner noise below to shift, long enough for footsteps on the stairs, and then a pause outside the door, and then a knock. She didn't answer. "Amara?" Junseo's voice, through the door. "I know what you need." Her voice came out steady. She was slightly surprised by that. "Give me 5 minutes." A pause. Then the sound of him settling against the wall outside the door. Waiting. Which was what he did. She sat for 5 minutes. She thought about the document on her kitchen table with M. Brooks written on it. She thought about the number in it, which was still real regardless of what had just happened in that dining room. She thought about Ji Yeon's face, and the chairwoman's face, and the cousin's face, and the way Junso had said someone pulled the guest records with the particular flatness of a man reporting something he found deeply, personally unacceptable, but had not yet been able to prevent. She thought about Malik saying he looks at you like dispatch looks at clues. Really hard. She thought about what was actually at stake here, which was not her dignity. She'd survived worse wounds to her dignity than this, but her son's stability. Her son, who was currently sitting beside her eating a dinner roll in a strange bed in a rich person's house in Connecticut because she had made choices that led here. She stood up. She looked at Malik. "I need to talk to Junseo," she said. "I need you to stay in this room. You can watch the frog detective thing on my phone, okay?" "Is there going to be yelling?" Malik asked. "I don't yell." "You do a quiet voice that's worse than yelling." She looked at her son. "Stay in the room," she said. And she opened the door. Junseo was against the wall, hands in his pockets, coat still on. He looked at her face, and he didn't make the mistake of saying anything first. She stepped out, pulled the door mostly closed. "You knew this was possible," she said. "When you made the proposal, you knew your family might investigate." "Yes." "And you decided to bring me here anyway." "I thought, what did you think, Junseo?" Her voice was the quiet kind. Malik wasn't wrong about the quiet kind. That it wouldn't matter because you could manage it, that you'd handle it in the room before it became a scene. She looked at him. "A man humiliated me in front of his family and business partners, and your mother sat there and let it happen, and you are standing in a hallway in Connecticut telling me you thought." He held her gaze. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He just stood there and received it, which was the right thing to do, and which also made her angrier because it left her nothing to push against. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's insufficient, and I know it's insufficient, but it's true. An apology doesn't fix what just happened down there. No. Your cousin just told a room full of people that I'm a fraud. I'm going to address that." "How?" She stepped closer. Not aggressive. Something more exhausted than that. "How do you fix it? Do you go down there and tell them actually, yes, we're married, actually the records were wrong, actually, what? What's the story now?" He was quiet for a moment. His jaw was set. Something was working behind his eyes. That private machinery of his, the part that was always calculating, and she'd never been fully invited inside. "There is a courthouse," he said carefully, "in Hartford, 40 minutes from here. It opens at 8 in the morning. The hallway was very quiet. Amara stared at him. I'm not... She stopped. Are you suggesting... I'm telling you that if we go to Hartford tomorrow morning, the record exists by 10 o'clock. He held her gaze, and his expression was stripped of everything except the thing she'd seen briefly and tried not to name. The thing that had been building for weeks in the space between table 12 and an alley in the snow and a park where her son had explained Saturn's rings to a man who asked real questions. I'm telling you that what my cousin said tonight is wrong, not strategically, actually wrong, and I want to correct it. Opposite, man. You want to marry me, she said, to win an argument with your cousin. No. His voice was low. I want to marry you because the arrangement stopped being an arrangement 3 weeks ago, and we've both been pretending otherwise, and I am... A pause. The first real pause she'd heard from him, the kind that cost something. I am not good at this. I am not good at any of the things that are happening to me right now, but I know what's true and what isn't, and I'm done performing the version where this is something I'm managing. Amara's heart was doing something loud and inconvenient in her chest. You don't know me, she said. I know your ring size, he said. I know your son's favorite planet. I know you touch your left earlobe when you're thinking and that you check the whole section before you clock out and that you stood in an alley in a blizzard and asked a stranger for help because you are too proud to let Derek Whitfield see you alone. And I know, he stopped. I know that you have been carrying everything by yourself for 6 years and you are so good at it that nobody notices how heavy it is. I notice. The hallway was utterly silent. Down the hall, from behind the door, the faint tinny sound of a Frog Detective theme song. Amara looked at him. She looked at the man who had sat alone at table 12 every Thursday for 3 months and tipped too much and agreed before she'd finished asking and sent a ring that fit exactly right. And she felt the full weight of the last 6 years and the full impossible weight of this moment. And she said, ask me again in the morning. And then she went back into the room and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed with Malik until he fell asleep, which took 40 minutes because he was wired from the strange house and the horses and the bread rolls. And she lay beside him in the dark with her eyes open and her heart doing the thing it had been doing for weeks that she had refused to name, and she did not sleep. Not once. At 6:15 she heard Junseo in the hallway. Not footsteps. She'd been listening for footsteps. Just presence. The particular quality of stillness that had weight to it, that she'd learned to recognize the way you learn to recognize a person's breathing in the dark. She got up without waking Malik. She'd already been dressed for an hour. She opened the door. He was there. Dark coat, keys in his hand. He looked at her face and he waited. Hartford, she said. Something moved through his expression. Not relief exactly, but the release of something that had been held under pressure for a long time. The car's ready, he said. I need 20 minutes with Malik. Take whatever you need. She went back inside. She sat on the edge of the bed and she woke her son the way she always woke him. Her hand on his back, his name, twice, softly. Malik surfaced slowly, blinking at the unfamiliar ceiling, and then looked at her with the specific alertness of a child who knew something was different. We're going somewhere early, she said. Where? She looked at her son. 6 years old. Saturn's rings and frog detectives and the kind of direct, unvarnished honesty that children have before the world teaches them to edit themselves. Junseo and I are going to get officially married this morning, she said, at a courthouse. Malik blinked, processed. Like for real married? Yes. Not just pretend? She paused. How did you know it was pretend? Malik gave her the look again. The one that suggested he found her question borderline insulting. Mom, he said, I'm 6. I'm not a baby. She stared at her son for a moment. Then she said, For real married? Yes. Malik sat up. He thought about this with visible seriousness, his brow slightly furrowed, the same face he made when he was working through a problem about planetary physics. Then he said, Does that mean he's my dad? The word landed in his room like something dropped from a height. Amara held her son's gaze. It means he's my husband, she said carefully. What it means for you and him, that's something the 3 of you figure out together. There's no rush on that. Malik considered this. Okay, he said. Then, Can I bring dispatch? Yes, she said. Get your shoes. Mboki. The Hartford courthouse opened at 8. They were the third people through the door. The clerk was a tired woman in her 50s who processed their paperwork with the efficient disinterest of someone who had witnessed 10,000 versions of this exact scene and held opinions about none of them. She asked them to confirm their names. She asked them to confirm they were entering into this willingly. She stamped 3 things. Malik sat on a bench against the wall with dispatch on his lap, watching the proceedings with the serious attention he gave to things he considered important. When the clerk said, "I now pronounce you married under the laws of the state of Connecticut," and looked up expectantly, Malik said, quietly but audibly, "You have to kiss." The clerk almost smiled. Junseo turned to Amara. He looked at her the way he always looked at her. Steady, contained, but underneath it something that had stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was. He raised his hand and touched her face, his thumb at the edge of her jaw, and he kissed her. It was not a performance. Amara had known, somewhere in the back of her body, that it wouldn't be. She'd known it since the dinner when he'd said, "I notice," and meant it. But knowing a thing and standing inside it were different, and this was real, and it was warm, and his hand was steady against her face, and she let herself, for 10 seconds, stop managing everything. Just 10 seconds. Malik said, "Okay, that's enough," from the bench, and they broke apart, and Junseo looked at Malik with an expression that was so entirely unguarded that Amara had to look away for a moment. They drove back to the estate in the pale winter morning. The trees along the drive were bare and silver with frost. The house sat at the end of it, still, waiting. Amara looked at it through the windshield and thought, "Here we go." Bambosim. The family was at breakfast. All of them. Same positions as the morning before, with the addition of 3 people who hadn't been there yesterday, associates of some kind, men in their 40s with the careful posture of people who understood exactly what room they were in. The chairwoman was at the head of the table. The cousin, the one who had spoken last night, was on her left. Ji-yeon was present, composed, her eyes moving to Junseo when they entered. Junseo walked in first. Amara was beside him. Malik was between them, holding dispatch against his chest. The room did the thing it did. That slight collective reorientation, conversations pausing, attention redirecting. Junseo did not sit down. He stood at the entrance to the dining room and he looked at his cousin and he said, in English, deliberately, precisely in English, so that nothing would be lost or approximated. "You raised a question last night about the validity of my marriage. I want to address it." The cousin looked up. His expression was controlled, but she could see the calculation running underneath it. The rapid assessment of the room, of Junseo's posture, of what was coming. "At 8:14 this morning," Junseo said, "Amar and I were married at the Hartford County Courthouse. The certificate is filed. The record exists." He looked at his cousin with an expression that was entirely still and entirely implacable. "I want that to be the last time a question is raised about my wife's position in this family, by anyone." The room was absolutely silent. The chairwoman was looking at her son. Her expression had moved into something complex. Not anger, not satisfaction, something that was trying to process multiple things at once. The cousin's face had gone carefully neutral. Ji-yeon was looking at her hands. Malik said from between them, "We got married at a courthouse. I was there." Several people at the table looked at Malik. Malik looked back at all of them with complete composure. Junseo almost smiled. "Sit down," the chairwoman said. Her voice was level. "All of you, eat." It was not a declaration of approval, but it was the end of the question, and everyone at the table understood that. Amara sat. Her heart was going very fast, and she was keeping her face still with a concentration that took everything she had. Junseo's hand found hers under the table. She let it stay there. The rest of the morning should have been fine. Should have been. At 11 o'clock, one of the new arrivals, the associates, the men who hadn't been there the day before, knocked on the door of the sitting room where Amara had taken Malik with his Saturn book while Junseo was in a meeting. The man's name was Lim. He was polite. He said he needed a few minutes, and she said she was with her son, and he said it wouldn't take long. She should have said no. She looked at Malik, who was deep in Saturn's rings, and she followed Lim into the adjacent room. There were 2 of them. Lim and the other one, whose name she hadn't caught. They were standing, not sitting, which was its own kind of message. Lim had a folder. "Mrs. Kang," he said. She heard the name, Mrs. Kang, and felt the strange vertigo of it. "We apologize for the intrusion. We have a matter that requires your awareness." "What matter?" she said. Lim opened the folder. He turned it toward her. It was photographs. 8 of them, printed clean. Derek Whitfield's wedding. She recognized the Aldridge lobby, the entrance. There were 2 photographs of her and Junseo arriving. The cameras from outside, the ones she'd seen clicking. Clear, well-composed shots. Junseo's face fully visible. Then there were photographs from inside. The conversation with Harmon, Junseo's hand at her back. A shot from what must have been a considerable distance with a serious lens. The 2 of them talking at close range, her face turned up toward his. These were circulated, Lim said, by a New York-based tabloid reporter attached to the Pemberton family's social circle. They ran a small item yesterday evening. He turned to the next page in the folder, a printed screenshot. The headline read, "Who is the mystery woman at the Whitfield wedding?" And below it, Junseo's name. Korean business figure Kang Junseo, linked to the Kang Group's controversial Singapore expansion, seen with an unknown companion. "Controversial Singapore expansion," Amara said. "There is a government inquiry," Lim said, "in Singapore. It has been ongoing for 7 months. It concerns several transactions that pass through the Kang Group's regional offices. The inquiry is sensitive." He paused. "These photographs, in this publication at this time, connect the chairman publicly to an event attended by several prominent American families. The timing is—" "Who sent these to the reporter?" Amara said. Lim glanced at his colleague. "We believe," he said carefully, "that the photographs originated from within the Whitfield family's circle, possibly in response to the chairman's visible presence at the wedding, which was unexpected by some attendees." Amara stood very still. "Derek," she said, not a question. "We believe the source was motivated by—" "I know what it was motivated by." Her voice was quiet, the bad quiet. She looked at the photograph of herself and Junseo in the Aldridge lobby, and she thought about Derek's hand on her arm and his voice saying, "I think I made a mistake," and the look on his face when Junseo said, "let go of her arm," and she understood with a clarity that was cold and absolute that Derek Whitfield had spent the 3 weeks since his wedding trying to figure out who Junseo was. And when he found out, he'd handed the photographs to someone who could cause damage with them, not because he wanted her back, because he couldn't stand that she'd moved on to something larger than him. She closed the folder. She pushed it back toward Lim. "Tell me what this means for Junseo," she said. "Specifically, the inquiry in Singapore is at a delicate stage. The investigators have been looking for any leverage point, any personal or reputational exposure that might pressure the chairman into cooperation before the legal team is fully prepared. These photographs, in conjunction with the wedding attendants, create a narrative that—" Lim stopped, chose his words. "That a woman from New York, with no established connection to the Kang Group's operations, who attended a society event with the chairman 2 weeks before their marriage, could be portrayed as relevant to the inquiry, as a potential point of contact or exposure." Amara looked at him. "You're telling me I'm a liability?" "The investigators could frame you as one," he said, "whether you are or not." The room was very, very quiet. Through the wall she could hear Malik turning a page. "What does that mean practically?" she said. "What do they do?" "They could subpoena you," Lim said, "for information about the chairman's activities. Even if you know nothing, the subpoena itself, a New York server, a woman the press can now describe as his wife of 2 months, appearing before a foreign inquiry, creates a story, one that is harder to manage than the photographs." Amara pressed her hand flat against the wall, just for a second, just to feel something solid. "Does Junseo know about this?" "He's being told in the other meeting right now," Lim said. "We wanted you to be informed separately, so you could—" A pause. "Assess your options independently." Independently. She heard what that meant. She heard the shape of what he wasn't quite saying, that there were people in this house who would consider it convenient if she assessed her options and found that the cleanest one was to step back. Dissolve the morning's courthouse visit through whatever legal mechanism applied. Return to Brooklyn. remove herself from the equation. She understood that Lim had not been sent here by Jun Seo. "Thank you," she said, "for informing me." Her voice was steady. It cost her something to keep it that way. "I'll need a few minutes." Lim nodded. He and his colleague left. Amara stood alone in the room. She pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the closed folder and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The radiator in her apartment knocking at 3 in the morning, the stack of bills in the corner of the counter, the drawing of the spaceship sneaker on the refrigerator, the document with M. Brooks on it. She'd accepted the arrangement for the money. That was what she'd told herself. That was the practical, manageable story, a transaction, clear terms, she knew what she was doing. That was what she'd believed when she'd stood at that kitchen table and looked at the number and thought about Malik's future. She didn't fully believe it anymore, and she hadn't for a while, and she needed to be honest with herself about that right now, in this room, before she decided anything. She thought about Jun Seo in the Hartford courthouse saying, "I notice," and meaning all of it. She thought about Malik saying, "For real, married." She thought about a Singapore inquiry and a tabloid photograph and Derek Whitfield's particular brand of small, destructive pride. She thought about what she was, actually. What she had, actually. A job at a restaurant and $400, and a son who could explain radio wave density to adults, and a ring that fit exactly right. She picked up the folder. She walked out of the room and down the hall, and she opened the door of the meeting room without knocking. Good. Jun Seo was at the head of the table with his jacket off, sleeves pushed to the forearm, and the expression on his face when she walked in told her he'd just been told about the photographs. 3 men at the table. 2 she recognized from the morning, 1 she didn't. The chairwoman was in the corner standing, with the contained stillness of someone who had been managing crises for 30 years, and had only recently run out of solutions. Everyone looked at Amara. She set the folder on the table. "I've been informed," she said. Jun Seo stood. "Amara, let me talk." Her voice cut him off, not harsh, but absolute. She looked at the room. "I know what the problem is. I know what the solution looks like from where you're all sitting." She kept her voice even. "I want Jun Seo to tell me that no one in this room sent Lim to suggest I remove myself from the situation." Silence. Jun Seo looked at the men at the table. Something moved through his expression that was hotter than anything she'd seen on him before. "Did someone here?" he started. "It was a precaution," one of the men said, the one she didn't recognize. His English was accented and precise. "Given the inquiry, the exposure—" "You sent someone to my wife," Jun Seo said. His voice had dropped, quiet, in the way that was worse than loud, the way Malik had identified, to suggest she reconsider her position in our family, in our home, on the morning of our wedding. The timing of the wedding itself was an impulsive, "Stop talking," Jun Seo said. The man stopped. Jun Seo looked at Amara. Across the table. Across the room. His expression was open in the way she'd seen only a handful of times. The expensive, visible cost of letting someone see you clearly. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. The photographs, the inquiry. These are consequences of my life and my choices, and they landed on you, and you didn't—" He stopped. "You didn't agree to this." "I agreed this morning," she said. "You agreed before you knew—" "I knew enough." She looked at him steadily. "I knew who you were. You told me it wasn't simple. I said, 'Tell me the truth for once.'" She held his gaze. "This is the truth. So now we deal with it." The chairwoman made a sound, not quite a word, something between a sound and a breath. "The inquiry," Amara said to the room. "What does it actually need to go away?" The men looked at each other. "It's not," the unknown man started. "I'm asking a direct question," she said. "What does the inquiry need? Not what would be convenient. What does it legally require to close?" A pause. The men looked at Jun Seo, who was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a word for yet. "Full documentation of the Singapore transactions," one of the other men said carefully. "A legal review of the transfers that have been flagged. The chairman's legal team has prepared most of it, but there are 3 transactions where the paper trail runs through a shell account that can be documented with supporting records if we access the original transfer authorizations," Jun Seo said. His voice had shifted, back into operational. precise. The mode she'd heard him slip into before. Which exist. We haven't produced them because producing them requires disclosing a secondary account structure we've been protecting, the chairwoman said from the corner, quietly. Protecting, Junseo confirmed. He looked at his mother. Something passed between them that was decades old and had no audience, and Amara didn't try to read it. Disclose the accounts, Amara said. Everyone looked at her. The alternative, she said, is a subpoena, which is a story, which is worse than disclosure. She looked at Junseo. Isn't it? He held her gaze. Yes, he said. Then disclose the accounts. She looked at the room. And deal with whatever that costs. Because what I am not doing, what none of us are doing, is letting Derek Whitfield's hurt feelings determine the outcome of our lives. Her voice was controlled and precise, and underneath it was 6 years of fury that she had never once let herself aim at the right targets. And she was aiming it now, and it felt like something that had been locked for a long time finally given the right key. The room was silent. Junseo looked at her across the table, and his expression was something she'd never seen on another person in her life. The particular look of someone seeing themselves reflected clearly for the first time in a very long time and finding the reflection against all expectation bearable. All right, he said. Junseo. The chairwoman stepped forward from the corner. Her voice was careful. The cost of disclosing those accounts, I know the cost. It exposes the limb transfer. It exposes the full structure of, I know what it exposes, he said. He didn't look away from Amara. We've been holding that structure in place for 3 years because we thought protecting it was worth the exposure elsewhere. We were wrong. He paused. I was wrong. The inquiry gets the documentation. The accounts get disclosed. We take the hit and we restructure from there. The unknown man stood up. You can't unilaterally... I can, Junseo said. Sit down. The man sat down. The chairwoman looked at her son for a long moment. Then she looked at Amara. Her expression had traveled a very long distance from the woman who had sat across the breakfast table and said, I don't approve. And it had arrived somewhere that had no easy name. She said something in Korean. Short. 4 words. Junseo translated without being asked, his eyes still on Amara. She says you argue like someone who has nothing to lose. Amara looked at the chairwoman. I have everything to lose, she said. That's different. Something moved across the chairwoman's face. It was not a smile. It was not approval. It was the acknowledgement of one woman who had spent her life fighting for things she couldn't afford to lose, looking at another one doing the same thing, and finding, in that recognition, something that didn't require a name. She turned and walked out of the room. The afternoon moved fast. Junseo's legal team was on calls by noon. The documentation process started. The estate, which had been holding its breath since breakfast, exhaled into something that was not resolution, but was at least movement. The sound of people working a problem rather than circling it. The cousin left before lunch. No announcement. His car was simply gone. Ji-yeon came to find Amara at 2 o'clock, in the stable where Amara had taken Malik back to see the horses because her son needed something simple and real after a morning of complicated adult machinery. Ji-yeon stopped at the fence and didn't say anything for a moment, just stood. I owe you an honesty, she said finally. Amara waited. I was the one who told the cousins. Ji-yeon's voice was flat. About the guest records. About the reservation under your name alone. She looked at the horses. I hired someone to verify the marriage records. I told Byung-woo, the cousin, what they found. She paused. I told myself it was because I deserved to know the truth. That if it was a performance, everyone deserved to know. She paused. That was not entirely honest of me. Amara looked at her. It was partly revenge, Ji-yeon said, for being set aside. For 9 years of understanding that waited and was never... She stopped. Something moved through her expression. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm telling you because you should know where it came from, and it wasn't from the cousins, and it wasn't from the chairwoman. Why are you telling me now? Amara said. When it's over. Ji-yeon looked at her for a moment. Because you're going to be here, she said. in this family, for a long time. And I would rather you know I'm someone who can tell the truth eventually than someone who lets you believe a worse version of it forever." Amara looked at her for a long time. She thought about what it cost a person to say that out loud in a room, or a stable, where it could only go badly for you. "Thank you," she said. Ji-yeon nodded. She touched the fence once, briefly. She walked back to the house. Malik looked up from the horse's nose. "Who was that?" he said. "Someone being brave," Amara said. Malik considered this. Was it hard for her? Yes. "Then it counts more," he said, with the absolute confidence of a 6-year-old who had worked this out and was certain of his math. Amara looked at her son. She thought about what Jun-seo had said in the courthouse, standing in front of a tired clerk on a Tuesday morning, his hand steady against her face. She thought about Derek's photograph in Lim's folder, her own face turned up towards someone else in the Aldridge lobby, clear and composed and lit from the inside in a way she hadn't known anyone was capturing. She thought about the number in the document with M. Brooks on it, and about how the number wasn't the reason anymore and hadn't been for a while, and she needed to stop pretending it was. She looked at the horse. She looked at the pale winter sky over the Connecticut trees. She looked at her son, who was explaining to a horse the basic principles of radio wave detection. She breathed. And then Jun-seo's footsteps came around the corner of the stable, and she heard them before she saw him, and her body did the thing it had been doing for weeks. That small, involuntary orientation, like a compass that had found its north and didn't ask permission anymore. And she turned to look at him as he came around the corner with his jacket open and his eyes finding her face across the distance with the specific precision of a man who already knew exactly where she was. And he looked at her, and she looked at him, and everything that had happened in the last 24 hours, the courthouse, the meeting room, Ji-yeon at the fence, the folder with the photographs, the morning she'd spent lying awake in the dark, all of it was compressed into this single moment in a cold stable yard with her son chatting quietly to a horse named Hyuk. And Jun-seo stopped a few feet away and said quietly, "The legal team says 48 hours. Then the inquiry gets the documentation and we're—" He stopped. Something shifted in his face. "Amara." "I know," she said. "There's still—" "I know," she said again. "There's still everything. There's still all of it." She held his gaze. "But we're here right now, and right now is—" She stopped. Because right now, Jun-seo's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. Something in it went very, very still. The particular stillness she'd learned to read as the signal that something had shifted in the operational landscape of his life. Something significant. He looked at her. "It's the Singapore investigator," he said. "Directly. Not through the legal team." He paused. "He doesn't call unless—" "Take it," she said. "Amara—" "Take the call, Jun-seo." He held her gaze for one more second. Then he picked up the phone. He said his name, and then he went absolutely still, and the color of his expression changed in a way she'd never seen before. And he said, in English, short, clipped, a man receiving something that requires total control to absorb. "When?" A pause. "How many?" Another pause. His eyes had closed. When he opened them, they were somewhere else entirely. "I'm on my way," he said, and he hung up. The stable yard was cold and silent. "What happened?" Amara said. Jun-seo looked at her. In his expression was something that went beyond anything she'd seen him carry before. Not just the weight of his operational world, not just the inquiry, but something personal, cracked open. The look of a man who had just been handed a cost he hadn't calculated. "The Singapore office," he said. "There was—" He stopped. "2 of my people, they've been taken." He paused. "By someone who knew about the disclosure. Someone who was told about it before the legal team was finished filing." He looked at her with an expression that was asking her a question he didn't yet have words for. "Someone inside this house." The winter air was very still. Malik had gone quiet beside the horse. Amara looked at Jun-seo, at the man who was her husband as of 8:14 that morning, at the man who had sat alone at table 12 for 3 months because it was the only place he could be no one, at the man who had said "I notice" and meant all of it. And she felt the full impossible weight of the life she had walked into, not by accident, not by arrangement, but by the specific and deliberate choice of a woman who had been carrying everything alone for 6 years and had finally, in an alley in a blizzard, asked for help. She looked at him and she said, "Who knew about the disclosure before the legal team filed?" Junseo's jaw was set. 3 people in that meeting room. Lim, the man whose name you don't know. His name is Choi. And he stopped. And who? A pause that was a second too long. "My mother," he said. The drive back to New York took 2 hours and nobody spoke much. Malik fell asleep again in the back seat, dispatch tucked under his chin, the Saturn book open and unread on his lap. The Connecticut trees gave way to highway, and the highway gave way to the first gray edges of the city, and Junseo drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw doing the thing it did when he was processing something he hadn't finished processing yet. Amara sat in the passenger seat and watched the road and thought about the chairwoman's face in the meeting room. The corner of it, the standing back and watching from a distance of it. And she thought about something the chairwoman had said at breakfast the first morning. "I have concerns about a child in this environment." She thought about how that could mean 2 different things. She thought about how a woman who had run a criminal dynasty for 30 years understood exactly what the disclosure of those accounts would do. Understood who would be exposed. Understood that the Singapore investigators were not the only people paying attention to what the Kang Group decided to hand over. She thought about how a woman who loved her son, and the chairwoman loved Junseo, that was real, Amara had seen it clearly in the sitting room, might make a different calculation than the one her son was making, might decide that 48 hours was too long to wait, might decide that warning someone was protection. She thought about all of this and she did not say any of it out loud because she was still working out whether she was right. And because Junseo was already carrying it, she could see it on him, and adding her unfinished thinking to his load wouldn't help either of them right now. "The 2 people taken," she said. "Are they safe?" "Currently, yes," Junseo said. "They're being held as leverage, not harmed. The investigators, the people who took them, want the disclosure called off. They want the accounts kept closed." "Why?" "Because the accounts document transactions that pass through structures those people also use. Disclosing the Kang Group's records means disclosing theirs." He paused. "The Singapore inquiry isn't just about us. We're a thread in a larger net. If we pull our thread, the net shows its shape. And they don't want the shape visible." "No." Amara looked at the road. "So your people are hostages to stop you from doing the thing that was going to fix the problem?" "Yes." "Can you get them out?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "but not cleanly." She understood what that meant. She didn't ask him to say it differently. "And the disclosure," she said. "If you pull it back to get your people out, the inquiry stays open. The inquiry stays open and we're back where we were before this weekend." He paused. "Except that I'm married now, and the photographs exist and the story in that tabloid isn't going away. So I'm still an exposure point." "You're my wife," he said. "That's different from an exposure point." "Junseo." She said his name carefully. "I need you to be operational right now, not—" "I am being operational," he said. "Operationally, you are my wife. That changes everything about how the people in this situation can use you. It closes one door." He paused. "It opens others." She sat with this. "What others?" "If they can't use you as leverage against me through the inquiry," he said, "they'll look for another way. Something personal, something that costs more." He didn't say what. She heard it anyway. Malik, asleep in the back seat. The bear-named dispatch. The Saturn book. Her hand closed around the door handle, and she made herself let go of it. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. "Right now. Not what you want to protect me from. What you actually need." He looked at her for a second. A quick sideways look. The kind you took when you were driving and also trying to see something clearly. "I need you in New York," he said. "Somewhere I can account for. Not the restaurant, not the apartment. Somewhere with security. I'm not putting Malik in a safe house. I know, I have a building in Junseo." She said his name again, with weight. "A building with security is a safe house with better furniture. He's 6. He'll know. He already knows something is wrong." She didn't argue that. It was true. "One condition," she said. He He gets to bring his books, and we tell him the truth, the version of it that's right for his age. We don't make up a story about a vacation. What's the right version for his age? She thought about it. We tell him that Junseo has a problem at work, and some people are being unkind about it, so we're staying somewhere safe for a few days while he fixes it. She paused. He'll accept that. He understands that adults have problems at work. Junseo was quiet for a moment. He's a remarkable kid, he said. It came out low and unguarded, the way things came out of him when he wasn't managing the output. I know, she said. They drove in silence for a few miles. The city was close now. She could feel it before she could see it, that particular pressure change, the density of things. Your mother, she said. He didn't answer immediately. I don't know, he said. You do know. A pause. Longer this time. She was trying to protect something, he said finally. She always is. The question is whether what she was protecting was the family's operational structure, or me personally, or the thing she's been protecting for 30 years that I've spent 15 years trying to figure out if it's worth protecting. He exhaled, something tired in it. She's not a simple woman. No, Amara said, she's not. Are you angry at her? Amara thought about it honestly. I understand her, she said. That's not the same as not being angry, but I understand her. Junseo glanced at her again. How? Because she did what she thought she had to do to keep her son's world intact. She made a choice that had a cost, and she made it anyway because she thought she was the only one who could see clearly enough to make it. She paused. I know what that feels like. I've been that person for 6 years. He was quiet for a long time after that. New York received them the way it always did, without ceremony, without accommodation, with the flat indifference of a city that had seen everything and categorized it all as normal. The building Junseo took them to was on the Upper West Side, glass and dark stone, a doorman who knew Junseo's face and said nothing. The apartment on the 14th floor was large and clean, and had a room with a window that looked north over the park, and Malik told only what Amara had said they would tell him, walked to the window and pressed his face against it and said, You can see a lot of sky from here. And that was that. He set dispatch on the windowsill as a sentinel. He opened the Saturn book. Amara sat on the edge of the bed in the room adjacent and called Kezia. Kezia answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. You have been completely unavailable for 3 days and you owe me everything, she said. I know, Amara said. Are you safe? Yes. Is Malik safe? Yes. A pause. Are you going to tell me what happened? Eventually, Amara said. Right now I need you to know we're okay. And I need you to not ask questions until I'm ready to answer them. Kezia was quiet for a moment. Then, okay. But when you're ready, Amara, I need the whole story. You'll get it. All of it? Probably not all of it, Amara said, but enough. Kezia made a sound that was affectionate and exasperated in equal measure. I love you, she said. I love you back, Amara said. And she meant it with a fullness that surprised her. The weight of a friendship that had stayed steady through 6 years of difficult and had never once asked her to be less than she was. She hung up and sat in the quiet room and let herself feel it. Junseo worked through the night. She knew because she didn't sleep well, and twice she heard his voice from the other room, low, controlled, in Korean and in English, and once in what she thought might have been Mandarin. And the second time she got up and stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment. He was at the table with his laptop and 3 phones and a legal pad covered in writing she couldn't read, and his sleeves were pushed up, and his hair was slightly wrong from where he'd put his hands through it. And he was utterly focused in the way of someone who had been doing crisis management long enough that it had become simply the texture of the work. He looked up and saw her. Go back to sleep, he said. Are they okay? Your people. Still secure. We're working on extraction. Not cleanly, she said. He looked at her. Not cleanly, he confirmed. She stood in the doorway for another moment. Is there anything I can do? He looked at her for a long count, and then he said quietly, Stay. Just that. Stay. She went back to bed, and this time she slept. In the morning, she woke to Malik already up, which meant it was later than she thought. She found him in the kitchen with Jun-seo, who had apparently been awake the entire night and was now sitting at the kitchen island with coffee while Malik explained, with the aid of a drawing he'd made on the back of a piece of legal paper he'd apparently found, the specific mathematics of Saturn's ring width versus its diameter. "The ratio is enormous," Malik was saying. "Like if you made a ring that wide in real life, it would only be as thick as this." He held his thumb and forefinger a few centimeters apart. "Like a piece of paper, but the size of a city." "That's hard to picture," Jun-seo said. "That's because your brain isn't used to space scales," Malik said charitably. "It gets easier." Jun-seo caught Amara's eye over Malik's head. Something in his expression, exhausted, real, briefly unguarded, made her chest do the complicated thing. "His people are out," Jun-seo said to her, quietly. 40 minutes ago." She exhaled, the full length of it. "And the cost?" "The disclosure is on hold," he said, "temporarily. While the legal team restructures the filing so the accounts that expose the other parties are handled differently. It takes longer, but—" He paused. "We don't hand anyone else a weapon while we fix our own problem." "Smart." "It was the legal team's solution," he said. "They'd actually suggested it 2 weeks ago and I overrode them." Something moved through his expression. "I was moving too fast." "You were trying to fix it," she said. "I was trying to fix it wrong." She poured herself coffee. She stood on the other side of the island from him and looked at him across the legal paper with Malik's Saturn diagram on it, and she thought about the past 4 days. The courthouse, the dining room, the stable yard, the drive back in the dark. And she said, "Your mother." He nodded once. He'd been waiting for this. "She called me this morning," he said, "before your people woke up. And she said—" He stopped. He looked at his coffee. "She said she made a judgment call that she believed was protective, that the disclosure at that speed in that form was dangerous, and she had information I didn't have about who was monitoring the filing process." He paused. "She said she should have come to me directly instead of moving around me." "That's an apology from her," Amara said, "as close as one as she's capable of." "Did you accept it?" He looked up. "I told her I needed time." He held Amara's gaze. She said to tell you that the way you argued in the meeting room was the most useful thing that happened this weekend." Amara was quiet for a moment. "She's not going to make it easy," she said. "Being in this family, being your wife in the way that actually means something. She's not going to stop having opinions and moving around people to protect what she loves." "No," he said. "I'm not asking her to." Amara looked at her coffee. "I'm just telling you I see it clearly, so you don't have to manage my perception of her." Jun-seo looked at her for a long moment. "You're remarkable," he said. It came out without the usual control on it, just direct, clear, a man saying a thing he meant. Amara looked at him. "I know," she said. And for the first time in a very long time, she said it without irony, without deflection, without the instinct to make herself smaller. She said it because it was true, and she was done unknowing the things that were true about herself. Malik looked up from his diagram. He looked at Jun-seo. He looked at his mother. "Are you going to kiss again?" he said. "Maybe," Amara said. Malik considered this. "Okay," he said. "But not while I'm drawing. It's distracting." 3 weeks later, Amara went back to work at 11 Madison Square. The general manager, who knew, who had always known, who received her with the particular careful neutrality of a man trying to calibrate the distance between his boss's wife and his employee, gave her the Thursday section back without discussion. She tied her apron. She checked her tables. She worked the section with the same efficiency and attention she'd always brought to it, and nobody said anything different to her than they'd said before, and that was what she'd asked for and what she'd received. Table 12 was occupied by a couple on what was clearly a first date, nervous, overdressed, slightly too careful with their silverware. She took their order and brought their water and was professional and warm and completely herself. At 9 o'clock, Jun-seo came in. He sat at table 12 because the couple had left and it was available, same as always. He ordered the same thing, coffee, the fish, the seasonal vegetable, nothing for dessert. He did not look at her differently than he had before, which was to say he looked at her with the same steady, thorough attention he'd always brought to it, The kind that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with the specific person she was. She brought his coffee. She set it down. "Quiet night," she said. "Yes," he said. She started to turn away. "Amara," his voice, even and unhurried. She turned back. He looked at her. He didn't say anything else for a moment. He just looked at her the way Malik had described, like dispatch looking at clues. Really hard. "Good," he said. That was all. Just that. The single word with all its weight. She almost smiled. She didn't because they were at work and she was professional. But the almost smile was visible, and he saw it. And something shifted in the line of his mouth in response, and she turned and went to check her other tables, and the evening continued. 4 months after Connecticut, Amara found a building. It was in Crown Heights, 2 blocks from her apartment, which she still had, which she had chosen to keep because it was hers, and because Malik's drawings were on the refrigerator and the radiator knocked every night, and she knew the sound of it the way you knew the sound of your own name. The building had been a hardware store, and before that a laundry, and it had large windows on the ground floor and a second level with a low ceiling and exposed brick that had been painted white sometime in the 90s, and now was the particular shade of off-white that came from years of being a lived-in thing. She stood outside it on a Tuesday morning in March and looked at it for a long time. She'd been thinking about this since before she could properly name it, since she was 19 and working her first restaurant job and sitting in the break room reading because she'd brought a book. The way she always brought a book, and the manager had said, "You're always reading, you should open a bookstore," meaning it as a joke. And she'd laughed because she was 19 and knew how to laugh at things that weren't funny. But the idea had stayed in her like a seed that didn't have the conditions to grow yet. A cafe. A bookstore. The particular combination of those two things, coffee and books, and a place where you didn't have to justify being there, where a single mother could sit with her kid for 2 hours and not feel the pressure of consumption, of having to order enough to earn the table. A place built specifically for the people who needed a place the most. She'd described it once to Junseo. One of those late-night conversations that had happened somewhere in the middle of the arrangement becoming something else. She'd been tired and her guard had been low, and she'd talked about it for maybe 10 minutes and then stopped herself and said it was just a fantasy. He hadn't said anything at the time. He'd just listened. She had thought afterward that he'd forgotten it. She had been wrong about that. A week after she found the building, a set of documents arrived at the apartment. Not the Upper West Side apartment which she used when things required it, and which had become a kind of second home for Malik, in the specific way that children adapted to new configurations of life, with a flexibility adults never quite managed. Her apartment, the Crown Heights one, the one with the broken elevator and the off-white walls and the radiator. The documents were a lease agreement for the building on Bergen Street, 2 blocks away. The name on the lease was hers, solely hers. Below the lease was a set of permits, renovation, change of use, food service, and below that a single sheet of paper with 2 lines on it, for the cafe. Not a gift, an investment. You decide the terms. No signature. But she knew the handwriting. She'd seen it on a legal pad covered in notes in the middle of the night, in a kitchen on the Upper West Side, with 2 phones and a laptop and her son's Saturn diagram underneath it all. She read the 2 lines 3 times. Not a gift, an investment. You decide the terms. She sat at her kitchen table and pressed her hands flat on the papers and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The radiator knocked. Through the wall, she could hear Malik explaining something to himself the way he did when he was working out a problem. That low, ongoing monologue of a child thinking out loud, the sound of an active mind that had not yet learned to be quiet about its process. She thought about what Junseo had not done. He had not bought the building and handed her the keys and said, "Here, this is for you," which would have been a gesture about his money and his capability and his love expressed as the removal of her agency. He had not set up a foundation in her name or hired a contractor and surprised her with finished renovations, because that would have been his vision of her dream rather than her own. He had not, at any point in the 4 months since Connecticut, made a move that treated her as a project to be completed or a person to be saved. He had listened. For months, across late nights and short conversations and one 10-minute monologue she thought he'd forgotten, he had listened. And then he had created the conditions for her to do the thing herself, and stepped back and let the terms be hers. She picked up her phone. She called him. He picked up on the second ring. "The terms," she said. "Tell me," he said. "Equal partnership. I run the cafe. You don't run the cafe." "Understood. I hire the staff. I set the hours. I decide the programming." "Yes. The name is mine to choose." "Obviously." "And the—" She stopped. She looked at the window, at the Crown Heights street outside, at the bare March trees and the brownstones and the kid on a bike at the corner. "I'm not naming it after you," she said, something in his voice that was almost laughter. "I didn't ask you to. I'm naming it Malik's," she said, "for the community. Because it was always going to be for the community. Because his name on a building in this neighborhood means something different than any other name I could put there." A pause. Quiet and full. "Yes," Junseo said. "It does." She looked at the lease, at the permits, at the 2 lines on the single sheet of paper. "You remembered," she said, "every word of it." "I remember everything you say," he said. "I have from the beginning." She sat with that for a moment. The full weight of being known by someone, not the version of yourself you present, not the competent, managed, everything is fine version, but the actual version, the one with the dream you stopped telling people about because it felt like tempting something you couldn't afford to lose. "Junseo," she said. "Yes." "Come over tonight," she said. "Not the other apartment? Here, bring food from somewhere Malik hasn't tried yet. He needs to expand his palate." She heard something in the pause that wasn't quite a smile, but was its structural cousin. "I'll bring Korean," he said. "He'll have opinions." "I know," Junseo said. "I'm looking forward to them." She hung up and sat for another minute in the quiet apartment. And then she got up and she went to the window, and she looked at the street, and she thought about the building 2 blocks away with its large ground floor windows, and its exposed brick, and its history of being a hardware store and a laundry. And now, if she moved right, if she did the work, if she let herself build something that was actually hers, her next thing. She thought about Derek Whitfield, and she found, with some surprise, that she felt almost nothing. Not forgiveness exactly. She wasn't required to perform forgiveness for a man who had handed her photographs to a tabloid reporter out of injured pride, who had tried to shrink her life because his own felt smaller next to it. But the anger had gone quiet. Not because he deserved her peace, but because she did. She thought about the cousin who had left the estate without announcement. About Ji Yeon, who had told the truth in a stable yard because she was trying, eventually, to be better than what the situation had made of her. About the chairwoman who had called and said, "I should have come to you directly," and meant it as close to an apology as she was capable of making, and who had sent, 2 weeks later, a single gift for Malik, a book about the Voyager probe, technical, dense, the kind of book you sent a child when you were paying very close attention to who that child actually was. Malik had read it in 4 days. He'd asked Amara who sent it. She told him it was Junseo's mother. Malik had said thoughtfully, "She chose a good book." And then, "Does she know I already know about Voyager?" And then after a pause, "I should write her a letter about what she got right." Amara had said he could do that. He'd written 3 pages. She hadn't read it. It was his letter. But Junseo had told her, with an expression she'd had to look away from because of what it was doing to his face, that his mother had read it 4 times. Malik's opened on a Thursday in October. The renovation had taken 4 months. Amara had made every decision: the bookshelves along the south wall, the low tables and floor cushions in the children's corner, the coffee bar along the north wall with its second-hand stools that she'd found at an estate sale in Flatbush, and refinished herself on 3 consecutive Sundays with Malik handing her sandpaper and narrating the process. The name was in clean block letters above the door, in the particular shade of deep blue that Malik had chosen himself when she'd shown him swatches and said, "Pick the one that feels right." And he'd picked this one immediately and said it was the color of deep space, and she'd ordered it that afternoon. The community came. They came because she'd been building toward this her whole working life without knowing that's what she was doing. Every table she'd served, every customer she'd remembered, every neighborhood she'd worked in that told her something about what people needed when they were tired and struggling and trying to hold their lives together. They came because the neighborhood had been waiting for a place like this, and because word traveled the way it traveled in communities that knew how to take care of each other, And because there was a sign in the window that said, "Everybody welcome, especially if you're having a hard time," which Amara had written herself and which meant exactly what it said. Junseo arrived at 9 in the morning before the opening. And he didn't come in through the front door because he understood without being told that the first person through the front door of Malik's should be Amara. He came through the back and he stood in the kitchen and watched her move through the space one final time, checking the coffee setup, adjusting a book on the display shelf, crouching to straighten something in the children's corner. With the expression he'd had since the beginning, the one she'd stopped trying to look away from. "Ready?" he said. She stood at the door. She looked through the glass at the street outside, at the people already gathered, her neighbors, Kezia, in the front of the crowd with her arms crossed, and an expression of someone trying not to cry and failing, Malik beside her in his good jacket with his hands in his pockets looking approximately 40 years old. "Yes," she said. She opened the door. They married again in December, inside the cafe after closing. Not because the courthouse ceremony hadn't been real. It had been real. It had been the most real thing she'd done in years, standing in a Hartford courthouse on a Tuesday morning with a tired clerk and her son holding a stuffed bear. But because Keziah had said, with the directness of a woman who had earned the right to say things directly, "You are not denying me a wedding," and Amara had looked at Junseo, and Junseo had looked at Amara, and they had agreed without speaking that the cafe made sense. Their people, their space, the room she'd built with her own hands, and his belief in what she could do with them. 40 people. Kezia in the dress she'd been planning since Amara told her about the courthouse, which was a dress that could only be described as a declaration. Malik in a suit he'd chosen himself, which he'd paired with sneakers that he'd argued for successfully on the grounds that they were comfortable and that Saturn's rings were also composed of unexpected materials. The chairwoman came. She sat in the third row and she wore dark clothing, and she watched her son's face throughout the ceremony with the expression of a woman finishing a long journey. She had not expected to finish this way and had not entirely understood until now was a journey worth taking. At one point she looked at Malik, who was standing as Junseo's best man with the authority of someone who had taken the role seriously and done research about what it required. Malik caught her looking and held up one thumb. The chairwoman looked at the small boy for a long moment, and then, for the first time in Amara's experience of her, she smiled. Not the architectural expression she'd deployed at the estate. A real one, brief and unguarded and entirely her own. Junseo said his vows without notes. He'd written them himself, and he said them looking at Amara with the directness that was simply his nature. No performance, no management of the room's response, just the words and the person he was saying them to. He said, "I notice everything about you. I have since the beginning, and I intend to keep noticing for the rest of my life." He said, "You asked a stranger for help in an alley in a blizzard. I want to be the person you ask for help forever." He said, "I'm not good at this. I'm going to keep being not good at it in ways that will require your patience, but I will never stop trying to deserve the version of myself I see when you look at me." Amara stood in the cafe she had built and listened to this man she had not expected, and she did not cry. She did not cry because she was happy. She was deeply and disruptively happy, the kind that didn't know what to do with itself, but also because she had spent 6 years being the person who held things together, and she was not, in this moment, going to lose that. It was hers. She would keep it even in the moments when she didn't need it anymore. She said her own vows. She had also written them herself. She said, "You listened. That's the whole thing. You listened and you remembered and you showed up. I don't have better words than that because I don't think better words exist." She said, "I have a son who already loves you. I don't take that lightly. I don't take any of this lightly." She said, "I'm not easy and I'm not simple and I have a lot of opinions and I intend to keep having them. I hope you're ready." Junseo said quietly, "I've been ready since the alley." Malik, from beside him, said, "Can we do the ring part now?" The room laughed. All 40 people in it, the sound filling the space she'd built, bouncing off the exposed brick, and the deep blue sign above the door, and the bookshelves along the south wall, and the low tables in the children's corner where, on a Tuesday morning, there would be single parents with their kids, and the particular relief of a place that had been built for them specifically, and did not ask them to be any version of themselves other than the one they actually were. Junseo took the ring from Malik. He put it on her hand. His thumb rested briefly against her knuckles, that small, deliberate pressure, the same as it had been from the beginning, the touch of a man who did nothing by accident. She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, Crown Heights was a Thursday night in December, cold and lit and alive with the ordinary noise of people moving through their lives, carrying their groceries and calling to their kids, and living inside the complicated, costly, irreplaceable fact of being here at all. Inside, the cafe was warm, the bookshelves were full, the coffee bar was cold and would be warm again tomorrow morning when Amara arrived at 6:30 and started the machines and unlocked the front door and put out the sign that said, "Everybody welcome, especially if you're having a hard time." Malik reached up and tugged once on Junseo's sleeve. Junseo looked down at him. "Now you're actually my dad," Malik said. Not a question, just a fact he was recording. Junseo looked at this boy who had explained Saturn's rings to him in a park in February, who had written 3 pages to a woman he'd never met about a book she'd chosen correctly, who had stood at a stable fence and held his hand out to a horse with the fearlessness of someone who hadn't yet learned to be scared of the right things, and maybe never needed to, and maybe that was the whole point. "Yes," Junseo said. His voice was steady, and it cost him everything, and he did not look away. Malik nodded. He reached out and took Junseo's hand the way he took his mother's hand, the way children take the hands of people they have decided to trust without ceremony or condition. And in the cafe named after him, in the neighborhood where his mother had raised him alone, and then not alone, surrounded by the people who had been there all along and the one who had arrived in a blizzard and stayed, Malik Brooks held the hand of the man who would spend the rest of his life learning how to be worthy of that gesture. And they stood together in the warm room while the cold city moved outside the windows, and the story that had begun in an alley in the snow settled, finally, into the long, quiet shape of a life.